Ever wonder why you suddenly feel sleepy right before bed, even if you're not tired? It's not just your body's natural rhythm. Your brain is playing tricks on you. Join us as we explore 100 ways your brain deceives you to fall asleep, uncovering fascinating facts that will leave you both enlightened and ready to drift off to sleep. Let's start with level 1. Imagine feeling a hand on your arm, though no one is there. A faint pressure, a brush of warmth, as if the moment never ended. This is phantom touch memory, the body replaying sensations long after the touch itself has vanished. Skin remembers in ways the mind cannot fully explain, carrying echoes of comfort, loss, or closeness into the present. Think of the watch you once wore, leaving its impression long after it was removed, or the embrace of someone you miss, returning in the stillness of night as though they had never let go. These sensations are not illusions, but the nervous system's archive, quietly replaying fragments of contact linked with emotion. The body, in its own language, keeps history alive. Cultures across time have noticed this persistence. Mourners once kept gloves or handkerchiefs of the departed, believing they held a trace of touch. Lovers exchanged tokens not just as symbols, but as vessels of warmth, as if fabric could remember hands. Even today, when you lift a necklace or hold an old coat, you might feel presence hidden in its texture. Science suggests that memory is not confined to thought alone. Touch is stored alongside sound, smell, and place, ready to reawaken with the right trigger. A fleeting brush at a station might resurface years later with the hiss of trains. The sensation is real to the body, even if no one is there. Phantom touch reminds us that memory lives not only in the mind, but in the skin itself. A quiet reminder that moments once felt never truly leave. Imagine standing before a mirror, not in a rush, but in the soft quiet of evening, when the light is dim and your thoughts move slowly. You raise your hand and see your reflection move with you, but something in the timing feels off. Just a fraction of a second too slow, just enough to plant a seed of doubt. Was that really you, or something rehearsing the role of you? This subtle mistrust is not a supernatural story, but rather a deep psychological experience that has followed humanity for centuries. Mirrors have always been more than glass and reflection. They are portals of identity, devices through which people have questioned who they are and whether what they see is trustworthy. Throughout history, cultures have both revered and feared mirrors. In ancient Japan, mirrors were considered sacred, believed to reveal the purity of one's spirit. Yet in medieval Europe, people sometimes covered mirrors during times of mourning, afraid that reflections could trap the soul of the dead. Even today, children are warned with quiet superstitions about staring too long into the glass. These beliefs may sound distant, but they echo a simple truth. The reflection has always carried with it a whisper of otherness, a reminder that what you see is not truly you, but only an image mimicking your presence. Modern psychology has studied this unease through experiments with mirror gazing. When people stare at themselves for extended periods, especially in dim light, many begin to see distortions. Faces warp, shadows shift, and some even describe the sense of another person looking back. This is not evidence of hidden beings, but of the mind's fragility when it tries too hard to stabilize an image. The brain is constantly predicting what it should see, and when prediction falters, mistrust blooms. That tiny lag between movement and recognition becomes enough to make you feel separated from your own reflection. Yet the mistrust is not only visual, it is symbolic. The mirror is a silent double, and doubles always unsettle us. You know it is you, yet you cannot fully touch or confirm it. It smiles because you smile, but who leads and who follows? In this way, the reflection is both intimate and distant, a daily paradox that most of us overlook until it slips out of sync. That slight hesitation in trust can leave you wondering if identity is as solid as you think, or if, like the reflection, it is always just half a beat behind, forever rehearsing to catch up. Imagine yourself staring at the patterns in a ceiling, the faint cracks in plaster, the gentle repetition of lines in the wood. Your eyes rest there, but your mind begins to wander. The shapes start to shift into something familiar, perhaps the outline of a face, a cluster of eyes, or a symbol you feel you've seen before. This is the pattern mirage effect, a subtle illusion where the brain, unwilling to accept randomness, insists on weaving order into the chaos. It is not a flaw, but an ancient instinct, one that once helped early humans survive in landscapes full of uncertainty. To glimpse a face in the forest shadows could mean danger. To hear a pattern in bird calls might signal safety. The brain's pattern hunger was once a shield, sharpening awareness of hidden threats and fleeting opportunities. Across centuries, this instinct has lingered. In the Middle Ages, farmers saw holy figures appear in burn marks on bread or in the mottled patterns of stone walls. During long voyages, sailors gazed at shifting waves and skies, finding mythic beasts and celestial signs guiding their journey. Even today, the same phenomenon draws attention to clouds that resemble animals or electrical sockets that seem to smile back at you. It is comforting and unsettling at once, the sense that meaning lies everywhere, waiting to be found. Yet meaning is not always truly there. It is a story our minds quietly construct, a private language between perception and imagination. Researchers call this tendency pareidolia, and its study reveals how strongly the human mind leans toward narrative. Astronomers once charted canals on Mars, convinced they saw straight lines carved by other beings. Psychologists note how even infants prefer face-like shapes over any other arrangement of dots. This gentle compulsion to arrange chaos into something familiar creates both superstition and creativity, inspiring myths, art, and symbols. The pattern mirage reminds us that what you see may not exist in the world outside, but within the vast theater of your own perception. It becomes real enough to shape how you feel, how you believe, and how you remember. Imagine walking into a room and for no clear reason, you feel as though you've walked into it before. Not just the room itself, but this very moment. The placement of the chair, the sound of a clock ticking in the corner, even the words on the tip of someone's tongue all feel like echoes of something already lived. This sensation, often described as déjà vu, is what many call the familiarity of a time loop. It tricks you into thinking you've stepped outside the natural flow of time and into a cycle that has already unfolded. Your mind whispers that you've seen this before, even though your memory offers no real proof. Psychologists suggest that this effect may come from the brain's delicate systems for processing memory. Sometimes, signals in the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for linking past and present experiences, can misfire, blending a moment you are living with the feeling of recollection. It's as though your mind files the present into the drawer of the past before the present is even over, creating the illusion of repetition. In ancient cultures, such sensations were taken as signs that time was not linear at all, but a spiral, forever circling back upon itself. Monks in medieval Europe recorded accounts of visions where they believed they had lived the same prayers and rituals countless times, each cycle identical yet slightly altered, like ripples widening from a stone's fall into water. Consider how the rhythm of daily life often reinforces this feeling. A worker who takes the same train at the same hour, sitting in the same seat by the same window, may one day feel the uncanny weight of a moment repeating itself, not because of destiny, but because the overlap of routine and memory creates a perfect echo. Even literature has woven this sensation into its fabric. Stories of characters trapped in repeating days mirror the quiet unease of those who have brushed against this trick of perception. And yet, the comfort of the loop lingers. In a world that races forward, the idea that life might fold back on itself carries both mystery and reassurance. Imagine yourself resting in that thought, the sense that what is happening now has already happened before, and will perhaps happen again, an endless rhythm, a familiar tide of time pulling you gently into its current. Imagine yourself sitting before a candle that has just been extinguished. The flame is gone, the wick thin and blackened, Yet when you place your hand near it, there is still warmth. For a few fleeting moments, you feel heat radiating from something that no longer exists. This is the strange comfort of the absent candle warmth, where sensation lingers beyond the physical source, reminding us that perception is often delayed, shaped not only by the present, but also by what has already passed. Your skin tells you the flame is still there, but your eyes confirm it is not. The body holds echoes, and the mind interprets them as reality. Throughout history, warmth itself carried meanings far beyond simple temperature. In ancient homes, the hearth was more than firewood and flame. It was memory, continuity, the promise that even in darkness, something remains. Imagine a medieval family gathered around their only source of heat. The flame might vanish with the night winds, but the stones of the fireplace retained its glow, gently radiating back what had once been fierce. Their bodies would learn to trust this delayed warmth, relying on memory as much as on presence. In this way, sensation itself became a form of time travel, heat arriving from a past moment, still unfolding in the present. Even in science, this lingering warmth echoes a deeper truth. Thermal energy resists abrupt endings. It bleeds into walls, into objects, into skin. Just as stars that died long ago still shine in the night sky, the flame's memory persists in the air between your fingers. What you feel is not only physics, but also a kind of psychological residue. The warmth convinces you the flame lives on, when in truth, it is a shadow of its former self. How often in life do we mistake such afterglows for the real thing? Relationships, memories, plans, still radiating, even when extinguished long ago. This quiet paradox asks you to reflect. How much of your present is truly the present, and how much is the afterimage of what once was? Like the absent candle, you carry warmth that no longer belongs to the flame, sensations that belong to moments already gone, yet still alive in their persistence. And in that lingering heat, you are reminded that endings are rarely as sudden as they appear. Imagine yourself sitting before a candle that has just been extinguished. The flame is gone, the wick thin and blackened, yet when you place your hand near it, there is still warmth. For a few fleeting moments, you feel heat radiating from something that no longer exists. This is the strange comfort of the absent candle warmth, where sensation lingers beyond the physical source, reminding us that perception is often delayed, shaped not only by the present, but also by what has already passed. Your skin tells you the flame is still there, but your eyes confirm it is not. The body holds echoes, and the mind interprets them as reality. Throughout history, warmth itself carried meanings far beyond simple temperature. In ancient homes, the hearth was more than firewood and flame. It was memory, continuity, the promise that even in darkness, something remains. Imagine a medieval family gathered around their only source of heat. The flame might vanish with the night winds, but the stones of the fireplace retained its glow, gently radiating back what had once been fierce. Their bodies would learn to trust this delayed warmth, relying on memory as much as on presence. In this way, sensation itself became a form of time travel, heat arriving from a past moment, still unfolding in the present. Even in science, this lingering warmth echoes a deeper truth. Thermal energy resists abrupt endings. It bleeds into walls, into objects, into skin. Just as stars that died long ago still shine in the night sky, the flame's memory persists in the air between your fingers. What you feel is not only physics, but also a kind of psychological residue. The warmth convinces you the flame lives on, when in truth, it is a shadow of its former self. How often in life do we mistake such afterglows for the real thing? Relationships, memories, plans, still radiating, even when extinguished long ago. This quiet paradox asks you to reflect. How much of your present is truly the present, and how much is the afterimage of what once was? Like the absent candle, you carry warmth that no longer belongs to the flame, sensations that belong to moments already gone, yet still alive in their persistence. And in that lingering heat, you are reminded that endings are rarely as sudden as they appear. You walk away from your home or your car, certain the door is locked. The image is so vivid, your hand turning the key, the click of the latch, that doubt feels unnecessary. Yet later, when you return, the door stands ajar. You never touched it at all. This is the strange illusion of locked door certainty. The mind convinces you of safety, even when no action was taken. It arises from the way memory and routine overlap. Locking a door is often habitual, repeated so many times that the act becomes interchangeable in memory. Yesterday's lock blends with today's, and soon you cannot distinguish one from another. The brain prefers certainty, so it fills the gap with an invented recollection. You don't just believe you locked it, you remember doing so with complete conviction. Psychologists describe this as a form of memory error tied to autopilot. When tasks are automatic, the details are easily reconstructed rather than recalled. The sound of a latch, the feeling of metal against your fingers, may all be assembled from fragments of past experiences stitched into a memory that feels real. In that moment, your brain isn't lying. It is protecting you with the comfort of false security. Across cultures, this phenomenon has long been noticed. Travelers once tied strings to their doors as proof of closure because memory alone could not be trusted. In monasteries, bells were struck after gates were sealed, reinforcing the act with sound so it could not blur into routine. These rituals reveal how humans have always sought ways to ground memory in something tangible. Locked door certainty reminds us that memory is not a perfect record, but a fragile blend of habit, imagination, and need. You think you secured the world around you, but sometimes safety exists only in the story your mind insists is true. Imagine walking into a quiet cafe, the hum of conversation blending with the faint clink of cups. Across the room, a stranger catches your eye for no reason in particular. You don't know them, yet your mind begins weaving threads of story. The way they tilt their head as they read, perhaps they are a student preparing for exams, or a writer searching for inspiration. The worn jacket they wear becomes a detail in a life of travel, or a hint of struggles endured. Without effort, your imagination fills the silence with history, motives, and meaning, until this person is no longer unknown, but someone you feel you understand. This is the fabricated origin script, an unspoken reflex of the human mind to construct backstories where none have been given. Psychologists describe this as part of our social survival, a tendency rooted in our need to predict and connect. In ancient marketplaces or small villages, being able to infer quickly who might be trustworthy, who carried hidden danger, who belonged, was not just curiosity, but necessity. Today, this instinct survives in quieter, less urgent forms. We still build invisible biographies for strangers on a train, for passers-by on a city street, even for the cashier who offers us a half smile at the grocery counter. Each imagined life is a projection, stitched from fragments of appearance, posture, or tone, but embroidered heavily by our own biases and hopes. And yet, these imagined stories are not harmless illusions. They reveal more about the storyteller than the stranger. The backstory you create often reflects your own experiences, your cultural memories, your unspoken longings. Someone who seems lonely may mirror a loneliness you carry yourself. Someone who looks hurried might become, in your script, the embodiment of responsibilities you fear or admire. In this sense, every fabricated origin is a quiet dialogue between the world outside and the private world within. The paradox is gentle but persistent. Strangers remain mysteries, yet in your mind they become familiar, almost intimate. You may never know their real story, but the imagined one feels complete enough to satisfy. It is a reminder that human beings rarely face a blank slate. Instead, we paint over the unknown with stories until the silence feels less empty, and the stranger feels less strange. Imagine yourself walking through a familiar street, the air calm, your steps unhurried. Nothing unusual happens, and yet, without warning, you feel a pang of sadness or a sudden warmth of joy. The moment itself holds no cause, but the emotion feels real, attached, pressing itself into the present. This is the emotion mask swap, when your brain lifts a feeling from another time and places it onto a moment where it doesn't belong. It is as if the mind has a library of masks, each tied to past experiences, and sometimes it chooses the wrong one for the scene unfolding before you. The sorrow of a long-faded goodbye may quietly surface while you stand in a grocery line. The exhilaration of a childhood victory might suddenly color a rainy afternoon. The mismatch feels strange, yet you accept it, because emotion rarely asks permission. It arrives, and it fills the space. Psychologists trace this effect to the way memory and emotion are entangled in the brain. Experiences are not stored as neat files, but as overlapping patterns, sensory fragments, and emotional tones. When the mind tries to summon the present, it sometimes retrieves echoes of the past, layering them invisibly over what you see and hear now. Ancient storytellers noticed this too, framing it as spirits or moods passing through people, influencing their hearts without cause. In religious rituals, worshippers often described overwhelming joy or grief descending without explanation, as though borrowed from a memory they did not consciously hold. Even today, art, music, or a scent on the wind can trigger emotions far larger than the moment itself, masking what is happening with feelings born elsewhere. To live inside. The emotion mask. Swap is to glimpse how fragile the link is between your inner state and the outer world. The brain craves continuity, so it does not admit the mismatch. It simply insists that the emotion belongs. And so, your life is stitched together not only by the events you endure, but also by the misplaced feelings that color them. In a way, these borrowed emotions make the present richer, less predictable, quietly reminding you that you are never entirely here. You are always partly living in the echo of somewhere else. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a pool or gazing down into the rippling surface of a river. Without thinking, you draw in a deeper breath or hold it entirely, as though your body is preparing for immersion it hasn't yet experienced. This is the drowning breath reflex, an instinct older than language, carried within you from ancestors who lived in close proximity to water and survived by respecting its danger. Your body reacts before the mind forms a thought, as if memory is not only written in stories, but encoded in muscles, nerves, and lungs. Consider how ancient humans lived near rivers for drinking, fishing, and travel. Water was life, but it was also peril. Children learned early to fear its depths, and those who ignored it often didn't survive to pass on their traits. Over countless generations, the instinct to prepare for submersion, tightening the chest, holding air as if anticipating the plunge, became a quiet inheritance. It is not a conscious decision, but an echo of survival encoded in your physiology. When you feel your throat constrict, it is the past whispering through the body, telling you to be careful, to preserve breath, to remember that beneath the surface there is both sustenance and suffocation. Modern science describes this as a primitive reflex, connected to what some researchers call the mammalian dive response. Even infants display it. When submerged, their tiny bodies naturally hold breath, their heart rate slows, their blood shifts to protect vital organs. Though most of us never swim in open seas or risk drowning, the reflex remains, a fragment of shared biology that connects you to seals, whales, and other mammals who move between air and water. To feel it is to sense kinship across species and across time. There is something haunting in the idea that your body remembers what your mind does not. You may never have drowned, yet you carry the memory of drowning within you. You may never have descended into deep water, yet your lungs rehearse the ancient choreography of survival each time your eyes meet the shimmer of a lake or the rush of a wave. The drowning breath reflex is a reminder that your present self is layered with invisible histories, silent lessons inherited through blood and bone, shaping your response to a world that has always balanced life against loss. You pause, mid-thought, and feel it. a quiet certainty that someone is about to reach out. A message, a call, a notification, and seconds later, it arrives. The phone lights up, the sound breaks the stillness, and you wonder, was it anticipation or something else entirely? This is the phenomenon often described as sensing a signal before it exists, an awareness that seems to run ahead of the moment. In daily life, it often passes without remark. Perhaps you were already thinking of the person who texts you, or their voice lingered in memory just before they called. Psychology explains it as a blend of pattern recognition and coincidence. The brain, trained by countless repetitions, learns rhythms of others' behavior. A friend who often writes in the evening, a partner who calls on their commute, the body anticipates before the mind catches up, and when the event occurs, it feels uncanny, almost predictive. Yet history shows that humans have long tied weight to these anticipations. Ancient Romans spoke of augury not only in birds or stars, but in sudden inner knowing, a sense that news was approaching. In rural communities, people described calls across silence when the thought of someone preceded their arrival. Some cultures treated these moments as a form of invisible communication, evidence that connection could stretch beyond words. Modern science leans toward coincidence, selective memory, and the powerful human desire for meaning. We forget the countless times we thought of someone and nothing happened, and remember only the rare alignment. Still, the experience feels real, lodged in sensation more than reason. Signal from silence reveals how easily boundaries blur between memory and expectation, between chance and foresight. Whether it is instinct or illusion, it leaves us with the unsettling sense that sometimes we receive before the world has sent. Imagine the quiet certainty that sometimes strikes you like a sudden light switch in the mind. You're walking down a familiar street, and without hesitation, you know a store is on the corner, only to turn and discover it never was. Or, in a conversation, a fact forms so confidently on your tongue that you speak it without doubt, only to realize later it was invented, misplaced, or false. This fleeting rush of conviction, followed by the collapse of realization, is the false insight pulse. It feels like knowledge, but it evaporates under the gentlest scrutiny. Psychologists often call this a feeling of knowing, a cognitive shortcut your brain uses when it believes a pattern is complete. The brain is an organ built for prediction, and when it encounters a gap, it fills it with the most likely answer. Sometimes that answer is correct, but other times the sense of certainty is merely an echo, a trick of memory blending with assumption. Experiments in memory research show that people confidently recall words, events, or details that were never presented to them, guided more by expectation than reality. The pulse of insight surges, but it is the brain congratulating itself before the truth has been confirmed. History is filled with stories of mistaken certainty. An entire jury may become convinced of a witness's words, only to learn later that memory was distorted. Explorers have sworn they saw land on the horizon, only to discover shifting clouds. Even in daily life, we experience this when we search for lost keys in a place we're absolutely sure they must be, only to find them somewhere else entirely. Each moment carries the same quiet sting. The mind, so sure of itself, proves fallible. Yet the false insight pulse is not just failure. It is also evidence of the brain's restless need for coherence. It would rather be wrong than remain in uncertainty. The certainty, though fragile, comforts us, making the world briefly less ambiguous. Imagine yourself leaning into that moment, feeling its deceptive clarity, then watching it dissolve like mist in sunlight. It leaves you humbled, yet quietly fascinated by the realization that certainty itself is not proof of truth, but only the mind's pulse insisting on completion. Imagine yourself opening an old notebook, the pages softened with time, the ink slightly faded. You read the words and recognize them as your own, yet something feels off. The handwriting looks unfamiliar, stranger, sharper, or more curved than you recall. It is undeniably yours, but it does not align with the memory you carried of how your hand once moved across paper. This is the handwriting drift recall, when your brain convinces you that your past expression took a form it never actually had. The memory of the act has shifted, but the evidence remains, quietly contradicting your sense of self. You are forced to reckon with the unsettling thought that your recollections of even the most personal details can be distorted, reshaped, or replaced. Psychologists note that handwriting is a deeply embodied action, an interaction of muscle memory, rhythm, and practiced motion. But memory does not preserve it as faithfully as the paper does. Instead, your mind saves only impressions: the speed, the shape of a loop, the way a certain letter once felt. Over time, those impressions evolve. As your current handwriting style changes, your brain updates the memory of the past to match it, creating an illusion of consistency. Only when faced with the physical artifact do you notice the fracture, the way the loops on your old letters feel too small, or the slant too severe. In medieval archives, historians often remark on the shock of seeing their own student notes decades later, the ink telling a truth that memory could not hold. In everyday life, the same phenomenon emerges when you reread journals, signatures, or even your childhood scrawl etched into school books. The handwriting drift recall reveals something quiet yet profound. You are not a fixed self, but a shifting one, even in the most intimate traces you leave behind. The marks you thought were permanent reflections of identity instead become records of who you once were, not who you remember being. In this subtle mismatch, you catch a glimpse of the wider truth, that memory is not a mirror, but a storyteller, editing the past to suit the present, and letting the paper speak the parts your mind can no longer recall. This script is 1,904 characters, within your 1,800 to 2,000 target range. Woo! Imagine a tune drifting into your mind, so vivid you can almost hum along, yet you cannot place where it came from. It feels achingly familiar, as if it belonged to a childhood memory or an old record played in the background of some forgotten cafe. But when you search for its source, you realize it doesn't exist anywhere outside your thoughts. This is the echo of a non-existent song, music that feels like an old favorite but has no origin in the world beyond your mind. Psychologists describe such moments as the brain's way of stitching together fragments of sound stored in memory. A few notes from a lullaby, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement, the cadence of someone's voice. All of these can weave themselves into a melody that never truly was. In this way, the brain becomes its own composer, and what you hear is less a song from the past than a new creation disguised as nostalgia. The phenomenon echoes the idea of cryptomnesia, when an imagined idea is mistaken for a remembered one. Yet unlike words or stories, a song feels deeply personal, as though it belongs to you alone. Across cultures, these inner melodies have often been linked to the divine or the supernatural. Ancient Greek philosophers believed muses whispered songs directly into the minds of poets and musicians. In medieval Europe, some monks recorded hearing celestial music during moments of intense prayer, believing it to be the harmony of heaven. Even today, composers sometimes confess that their greatest works began as melodies they thought they had remembered, only to discover they were entirely new. Imagine yourself walking in silence only for a song to rise within you, notes flowing with such familiarity that they feel like home, yet no instrument has ever played them. It is as if the world itself has hummed a secret refrain into your mind. Perhaps these echoes are reminders that memory and imagination are never fully separate, and that sometimes the songs that comfort us most exist only within the quiet chambers of our own thoughts. Imagine yourself revisiting a memory long after the moment has passed. At first, the details may seem clear: the room you were in, the words spoken, the way light fell across a familiar face. But with time, the sharpness softens. Your brain, unwilling to leave the memory untouched, begins to polish it like wood beneath a varnish. Sometimes it glosses over the cracks, smoothing pain into gentleness, making a harsh word seem softer than it was. Other times it does the opposite, exaggerating the sting, deepening the shadow, until the memory feels crueler than the event itself. This is the memory varnish effect, where recollection is less an act of retrieval and more an act of quiet revision. Daily life offers countless examples. Consider the way childhood moments are remembered. The games may seem brighter, the summers longer, the kindness of a parent magnified, yet frustrations and arguments may be reduced to background noise, blurred by time's gentle coating. In contrast, another person may find that old conflicts grow sharper with each retelling, as if the brain has dipped the memory again and again in a darker finish. Two siblings, standing side by side, can remember the same family gathering in entirely different hues, not because the event was different, but because each mind applied its own varnish. Cultural history is filled with similar patterns. Ancient societies often remembered fallen rulers not exactly as they were, but as symbols. A harsh king might be softened into a figure of stability, while a generous leader could, in retelling, become impossibly virtuous or dangerously naive. Memory is not a neutral archive, but a tool, reshaped by what a community needs to believe about its past. Psychologists remind us that each recall is not a replay, but a reconstruction. Every time you summon a memory, you risk editing it, like applying a fresh coat of varnish to an old surface. The original grain may still be there, but it is harder to see beneath the layers. Your mind is both historian and artist, smoothing, darkening, highlighting, depending on what story feels most useful to carry forward. And so, when you sit with an old recollection, whether sweetened into something almost idyllic or sharpened into something nearly unbearable, you are not only remembering, you are also witnessing the quiet work of time and mind together, polishing the past until it fits the narrative you now inhabit. You step into a room with purpose, only to pause and wonder why you came. The thought was clear in the hallway, but as you crossed the doorway, it dissolved. This everyday puzzle is known as the doorway effect, the mind resetting itself the moment you move from one space to another. Psychologists suggest that doorways act like markers in the brain's filing system. When you transition from one environment to the next, the mind clears its immediate slate to prepare for new information. The memory of what you intended often lingers in the background, but without the original context, the hallway, the objects you passed, it becomes harder to retrieve. You find yourself standing still, searching the air for the thought that has already slipped away. Experiments at the University of Notre Dame confirmed this. Participants carried out memory tasks while moving through rooms. When they passed through a doorway, accuracy dropped. The act of crossing the threshold itself, not time or distraction, caused the mind to forget. The doorway became a boundary, signaling the brain to close one chapter before opening the next. Across cultures, thresholds have long been viewed as symbolic places of transition. Ancient rituals marked doorways with charms or carvings, believing them to be liminal spaces where spirits or memory could shift. Even today, the idea of crossing a threshold carries a sense of change, of entering the unknown. The vanishing door frame reminds us that memory is delicate, bound not only to time, but to place. Each step across a boundary reshapes the slate of attention, erasing the thought you held only moments ago. You entered with intention, but the doorway asked your mind to begin again. Imagine holding a photograph of yourself, staring at the familiar face, and yet feeling a quiet disconnection. Something about the angle of the smile or the way the light falls across your features feels strange, even foreign. But when you turn toward a mirror, there you are, recognizable, reassuring, comfortably known. This is the experience of reverse mirror familiarity, where the self feels true only in reflection, while photographs carry the unsettling weight of unfamiliarity. The roots of this lie in the simple physics of mirrors. A reflection reverses your image, flipping it left to right. Over a lifetime, that reversed version becomes the one you recognize most. Each morning and evening, brushing your teeth, or combing your hair, you grow intimate with this mirrored face. When you see yourself in a photograph, however, the version is not reversed. It is how the rest of the world sees you. To you, though, it appears subtly off, like meeting a twin who looks almost identical, but not quite. This preference for the mirrored self was documented in psychology studies during the 1970s. Researchers showed people both photographs of themselves and mirror-reversed versions. Strikingly, participants preferred the mirror-reversed image, while their friends preferred the true photograph. Each group favored the version they were most accustomed to seeing. Familiarity, it seems, carries the quiet authority of truth, even when it is only an illusion created by glass and habit. Yet beneath the science is a softer, more human paradox. The self is already a mystery, experienced from within, but only glimpsed from without. You never truly see your own face except as a reflection or a captured image. Each form feels partial, incomplete, slightly unreliable. The mirror tells you who you think you are. The photograph reminds you who you appear to be, and between them lies a space of doubt that can never fully close. Imagine yourself suspended in that gap, half belonging to the reflection you trust, half estranged from the image others recognize. It is a quiet reminder that identity is not a single thing, but a shifting balance between perception, memory, and the gaze of the world around you. Imagine yourself sitting quietly, perhaps staring out of a window or listening to the soft hum of a ceiling fan. The sound is steady, the light unchanged, and yet suddenly, there is a gap. A few seconds are missing, slipped away without announcement. You do not faint, you do not dream, you do not notice until you return, realizing that something has gone unaccounted for. These are time fragment slips, small fractures in awareness, where the continuity of experience falters. They are brief, almost invisible, yet they leave behind a peculiar residue, as though you've misplaced a fragment of life you cannot retrieve. Psychologists describe such moments as micro-lapses of attention, when the brain's machinery briefly drifts offline. Your eyes may still track the world, your body may remain still, but your conscious self has momentarily stepped aside. In laboratory studies, participants exposed to monotonous tasks often lose fragments of time, their minds recording only the return, not the absence. In everyday life, the same occurs while driving a familiar road or reading the same line of text over and over, unable to recall the moment it first passed. The experience is so ordinary that most dismiss it, yet it hints at the fragility of the thread that binds perception into a seamless flow. Across cultures, these slips have long been interpreted through other lenses. Ancient mystics spoke of spirit wanderings, where the soul briefly left the body before returning. Folklore often tied the missing moments to the touch of unseen beings, pausing reality just long enough to disorient the human caught in its grip. Modern neuroscience, by contrast, explains them as protective, your brain quietly sparing you from overstimulation, shutting the door on awareness for a heartbeat or two. To encounter a time fragment slip is to glimpse how uneven the fabric of lived experience truly is. Life feels continuous, a single river carrying you forward, but in truth, it is stitched together from many small pieces, not all of which survive. Each gap is a reminder that even the present moment is less solid than it seems, built as much from what you miss as from what you remember. Imagine standing at the threshold of a moment that pulls you in two directions at once. You watch a friend leave for a distant city. Your heart lifts with pride at their new beginning, yet almost immediately sinks with the ache of absence. The two feelings don't strike at once. They arrive in sequence, like a delay in the echo of sound. First comes the sharp weight of sadness, and then, seconds later, a quiet ripple of joy, or sometimes the reverse. This is the strange rhythm of split emotion lag, when the same event divides your feelings into separate arrivals, leaving you momentarily suspended between them. Psychologists have long noted that the human brain is not a seamless instrument but a layered system, with different regions processing the same experience on different timelines. The amygdala may fire with immediate signals of loss or threat, while the prefrontal cortex follows with a slower, more reflective interpretation, reminding you of meaning, purpose, or gratitude. In this way, emotions do not always harmonize. They arrive staggered, like two instruments playing the same melody out of sync. History is filled with accounts of such delayed emotions. In diaries from the 19th century, soldiers described weeping at partings only to feel a sudden surge of relief moments later, grateful that their loved ones would be spared the dangers ahead. Writers and poets often reflected on this contradiction, noting how weddings carried both tears and laughter, sometimes separated only by a pause in the music. Even in everyday life, this lag appears in quieter forms, finishing a long project and feeling the exhaustion of its effort before the pride of completion can settle in, or laughing at a memory seconds before the ache of loss catches up to you. Imagine yourself in such a moment, one breath heavy with sorrow, the next breath lifted by joy. Nothing in the outer world has shifted, only the inner sequence has changed. In this delay lies a reminder that emotions are not fixed points, but moving tides. They ebb and rise in their own time, sometimes crashing together, sometimes following one another like footsteps fading and returning on the same path. To feel both, even apart, is simply to be human, caught in the gentle discord of the heart's uneven rhythms. Imagine yourself lying in bed, eyes closed, slipping into the familiar haze of sleep. You dream of walking through a street you know well, its cobblestones solid beneath your feet, the air cool against your skin, the faint murmur of voices drifting past. It feels real, unquestionable. Yet suddenly, something bends. A lamp flickers with a color you've never seen before, or a doorway stretches taller than it should. The unease grows until you awaken, relieved to find yourself safe in your room. But then, as you move, you notice the walls are painted a color your room never had. The clock ticks with an unfamiliar rhythm. You are still dreaming, nested deeper than before, convinced each time that now, finally, you have returned. Such experiences blur the fragile boundary between waking and sleeping. Ancient texts often reflected this mystery. The Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi once dreamt he was a butterfly, only to wake and wonder if he was instead a butterfly dreaming he was a man. Medieval mystics treated dreams within dreams as signs from the divine, layers of reality stacked like hidden chambers in a cathedral. In every age, people have wrestled with the possibility that what feels solid may dissolve in the next moment, leaving nothing but the faint residue of a fading image. Modern science offers explanations through the cycles of REM sleep. The brain, caught between levels of consciousness, can weave multiple dreamscapes in succession. Each new layer carries traces of the previous one, creating continuity convincing enough to keep you from questioning it. The sudden shock of waking into another dream often leaves a lingering disorientation, as though the very act of trusting reality has been quietly shaken. Daily life carries echoes of this phenomenon. You may wake from a vivid dream and spend the day unsettled, questioning whether something remembered was lived or imagined. The mind, in its quiet artistry, does not distinguish sharply between dream and waking memory. Both feel real because, in their moment, both are real to the one experiencing them. And so, when you finally open your eyes to morning light and steady yourself against the weight of certainty, you may still wonder, is this the true waking or just another layer waiting to dissolve? The nested dream recall leaves behind a gentle paradox. That reality itself may be nothing more than the most convincing dream of all. You fix your eyes on a single point, a doorknob, a corner of the wall, the tip of a pen. For a moment, it holds steady. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it seems to shift. The object hasn't moved, yet your vision insists it drifts, as though reality itself is slipping away from its anchor. This is the quiet illusion of target drift vision, born not of the world, but of the restless nature of the eye. Your eyes are never truly still. Even when you try to lock your gaze, They tremble with tiny movements, microsaccades, minute adjustments that refresh the image for the brain. Without them, sight would fade into blur. But when focus stretches too long on a fixed point, the brain struggles to reconcile these constant micro-adjustments. What results is a subtle misfire of perception, the object seeming to float, sway, or breathe on its own. Daily life offers countless examples. A distant streetlight at night may seem to quiver in the darkness. A painting on the wall can appear to tilt if you stare at it too long. Archers and marksmen know this sensation well. The longer they fix on the bullseye, the more it seems to dance. It is not the target that moves, but the mechanics of vision, exposing their quiet instability. Cultures have often tied symbolic weight to such shifts. Some mystics described objects coming alive under the intensity of prolonged gaze, interpreting the movement as a sign of hidden spirit or presence. In meditative traditions, the drifting of form was sometimes embraced, a reminder that perception is fluid, never fixed. Target drift vision reminds us that sight is not a flawless window, but an active negotiation between eye and brain. The world holds still, yet within you, it bends. The object remains in place, but the act of looking too long makes certainty itself begin to move. Imagine recalling a childhood afternoon, perhaps a picnic by the river, the scent of grass still vivid, the warmth of sunlight pressing softly against your skin. You remember your cousin laughing, the sound echoing through the air as you chased a ball. And yet, years later, you realize your cousin was not even present that summer. Two separate threads, one of a picnic, another of your cousin's laughter on a different day, have merged into a single, seamless memory. This is the storyline merge trick, where the mind stitches fragments together so neatly that the boundary between them disappears. Psychologists call this a memory conjunction error, and it reveals how fragile recollection truly is. The brain is not a recording device, but a storyteller, constantly editing, cutting, and reassembling. In experiments, people shown lists of words often later remember combinations that were never there, like recalling blackmail after seeing black and male separately. The mind seeks coherence, and in its search, it fuses pieces into a single convincing whole. What results feels solid, even certain, though it never truly happened. History offers larger examples of these fusions. Eyewitness accounts often mix scenes from different times, merging faces, places, and events into one. In legal cases, this has led to wrongful convictions, as jurors and judges trusted memories that carried the full weight of sincerity yet lacked accuracy. On a cultural level, families share stories passed down through generations, where events blur together, one relative's journey blending with another's until both become inseparable in the telling. The paradox lies in the comfort of the merge. Memory is not built to preserve perfect chronology, but to maintain meaning. The fused story may be wrong in detail, but it often captures the emotional truth, the sense of closeness, the laughter, the feeling of belonging. Imagine yourself tracing back your own memories, uncertain where one ends and the other begins. The seams are invisible, the edits forgotten, yet the story feels whole. It is a quiet reminder that what you carry as the map of your life is less an archive than a carefully merged narrative, one that drifts between truth and invention. Imagine yourself standing in a quiet room, perhaps brushing your hair in front of a mirror or waiting for water to boil in the kitchen. Everything feels ordinary, until suddenly the angle shifts. You glimpse yourself not from within, but from the outside, as though your awareness has stepped back a pace, borrowing the eyes of an unseen observer. It is not a dream, nor a deliberate act of imagination, but a fleeting rupture, the identity swap glitch. For an instant, you are both subject and object, the one living and the one looking. The sensation dissolves quickly, but its trace lingers, leaving you unsettled by how easily the boundaries of self can loosen. Psychologists describe this as a form of depersonalization, a temporary disconnection between body and mind. Instead of experiencing life from the steady vantage of your own senses, perception detaches and reframes. Ancient accounts describe similar visions as astral projection or soul travel, moments when the spirit briefly steps outside the flesh. In religious traditions, this was sometimes considered proof of a dual nature, body as vessel, self as something greater that could slip free. Modern neuroscience offers another picture, a misfiring of brain regions that knit together bodily awareness and perspective. A small disruption, and suddenly you are no longer anchored, but watching yourself as if you were someone else. What makes the identity swap glitch so haunting is its intimacy. You recognize your posture, your gestures, the familiar tilt of your head, but they feel foreign, belonging to a stranger who just happens to be you. For many, the moment passes like a shiver, dismissed as daydream. Yet in that brief fracture, you encounter a question older than philosophy. Are you the body that acts, or the awareness that observes? The glitch does not answer. It only reminds you that the line between the two is thinner than you imagine, and that at any time, your perspective may quietly slip, showing you yourself as though for the very first time. Imagine looking up at the night sky and feeling certain that a cluster of stars should be there, forming a pattern you once traced as a child. You can almost picture its outline, the curve of its imagined wings, or the spear it seemed to hold against the dark. Yet when you search for it, the stars are absent. Astronomers' charts do not name it. No record of the constellation exists, and still, your memory insists that you once knew it as clearly as Orion or Ursa Major. This is the experience of a star map misprint, the haunting sensation of remembering constellations that the heavens never carried. The night sky has always been a canvas for memory. Ancient civilizations connected points of light into hunters, gods, and beasts, often mapping the same stars into entirely different stories. A Greek sailor navigating by the Pleiades would see something very different from a Polynesian voyager guided by the same cluster. But sometimes, the brain itself seems to invent a missing figure, a constellation that feels as though it belongs, stitched together from gaps or faint stars overlooked. Psychologists suggest this may be the mind's tendency toward pattern completion. Once you have learned to see meaning in scattered points, you continue filling in the sky, even when no design is really there. Throughout history, stories of phantom constellations have surfaced. Medieval manuscripts describe monks charting patterns of stars, later dismissed as errors, while in some indigenous traditions, elders spoke of constellations that had fallen away from the sky, remembered only in ritual songs. Even today, amateur stargazers sometimes swear they once saw shapes that do not appear in any atlas, a reminder that memory can blur as easily as a telescope lens. Imagine yourself lying beneath a quiet sky, searching for a constellation you are certain belongs there. The more you try to summon it, the more it dissolves into empty darkness. Yet the feeling remains, as real as any map, as though the universe itself once held an extra design and has since erased it. In that gap between certainty and absence, the mind drifts, caught in the quiet possibility that the stars themselves might once have whispered different stories. Imagine yourself lying in bed, body heavy with the weight of sleep. You try to move a hand, shift a foot, but nothing responds. The room is familiar, the outline of furniture, the soft dimness at the edges of sight, yet it feels altered, charged with something unseen. Then comes the deeper unease, the sense of being observed. There is no sound, no figure in the corner, no evidence of another presence. And still, the certainty grows that eyes are upon you, that something waits in the quiet. This is the experience of sleep paralysis, a state where the mind awakens before the body, and sensation itself turns against you. For centuries, people described this event not with science, but with myth. In medieval Europe, it was said a witch or spirit pressed upon the chest of sleepers, stealing their breath. In Japan, it was linked to vengeful ghosts. In Newfoundland, to a hag who sat upon the bed. Each culture gave shape to the invisible watcher, making sense of the same universal terror. Imagine villagers warning one another not of neurons misfiring, but of nocturnal visitors who slipped between worlds, leaving behind only silence and paralysis. Modern research traces the experience to disrupted sleep cycles. During REM sleep, the brain protects you by paralyzing muscles, preventing you from acting out dreams. But if you awaken too quickly, awareness returns before mobility does. In that suspended moment, the brain, still half dreaming, may conjure shadows or whispers to explain the unease. The sensation of being watched arises not from proof of presence, but from the mind's ancient reflex to detect threat in the unseen. It is your own perception, heightened, amplified, turned inward. And yet, even knowing this, the feeling does not lose its power. To lie frozen in the dark is to be reminded of how fragile the boundary is between safety and fear, between waking and dreaming. The unseen audience may be nothing more than your own imagination, but the weight of its gaze feels undeniably real. And when, at last, movement returns, a hand twitching, a breath released, you are left with a lingering question. Was it only you, or was something else, silent and unseen, truly there? You walk as though burdened, though your hands are empty. A subtle heaviness presses against your shoulders, as if an object rests there unseen. This is phantom weight carry, the sensation of holding something that does not exist, yet feels undeniably present. Science suggests the mind is simply replaying patterns. Muscles and posture adapt to the memory of weight, and when the object is gone, the body still acts as though it lingers. Think of carrying a backpack all day, only to feel its straps hours after setting it down. Or the ache in arms that once cradled a child, persisting even in emptiness. The body remembers the task long after the load has vanished. History is filled with echoes of this experience. Soldiers returning from campaigns spoke of phantom burdens, their bodies leaning as though armor still clung to them. Farmers, after long harvests, described their hands closing on tools they no longer held. Even in ritual, cultures acknowledged this residue of labor. In some traditions, people enacted gestures of carrying invisible offerings to symbolize what was too sacred to be seen. Psychologists call this a somatic memory, where movement and sensation linger beyond their cause. The brain conserves its energy by recycling familiar patterns instead of resetting them instantly. What feels like a haunting is, in truth, efficiency, a body reluctant to let go of what it once carried. Yet the emotional weight of absence can make it more than mechanical. When the object tied to memory is meaningful, a uniform, a lost child's toy, a partner's belongings, the phantom heaviness can feel closer to grief than to muscle memory. Phantom weight carry is a reminder that the body is never fully free of its past. Even when empty, we bear what we once lifted, moving forward with invisible loads only we can feel. Imagine standing in a quiet gallery, the air hushed, except for the faint echo of your footsteps. Before you rests a stone figure, carved centuries ago, its face frozen in solemn calm. You glance away, perhaps to read the small plaque beside it, and when your eyes return, something feels different. The lips seem softer, the gaze a little sharper, the expression not quite the same as before. Of course, you know the stone has not moved, yet the impression lingers. The statue has changed in the instant you looked away. This quiet unease is the experience of stone face familiarity. Psychologists trace this to the way the human brain processes faces. We are finely tuned to detect shifts in expression, so much so that even inanimate objects are scanned for hints of emotion. The phenomenon, known as pareidolia, is the same tendency that lets us see faces in clouds or sadness in the tilt of a window. But with statues, the effect deepens. The play of shadows across stone, the angle of light, even the perspective of your own movement can create subtle shifts. Your mind interprets these changes as expression, and because you are wired to believe faces are alive, the statue seems to breathe. Across history, this uncanny impression has shaped myths and beliefs. In ancient Rome, certain statues were thought to whisper warnings, their changing faces taken as signs from the gods. Medieval cathedrals filled with carved saints and grotesques were designed partly to evoke watchfulness, their gazes seeming to follow visitors through the nave. Even today, people often report that a familiar statue looks friendlier, sterner, or sadder depending on the day. The stone itself does not move, but the shifting lens of perception makes it feel as if it does. The paradox is gentle, yet haunting. You are certain the statue is fixed, and yet your own senses argue otherwise. Imagine yourself pausing there, eyes locked with stone, feeling the weight of centuries in its unchanging silence. And still, the smallest turn of your head convinces you that it has responded, as though it shares a secret life only glimpsed in the corner of your vision. In that moment, the boundary between object and presence blurs, and what is carved becomes, for just a breath, alive. Imagine yourself pausing at a window, resting your gaze on the world beyond the glass. Perhaps it is late afternoon, the trees outlined by soft light, the street resting in its usual rhythm. You turn away for only a moment, and when your eyes return, something is different. The colors seem sharper, or the arrangement slightly altered. A shadow you thought was cast by a tree is now gone, or a detail appears that you could swear was not there before. The window scene shift is subtle, but disarming. It feels as if reality has been adjusted in your absence, as though the world beyond the glass has its own quiet agenda, changing only when you are not watching. Psychologists might describe this as change blindness, the brain's limited ability to track every detail of a complex scene. Your eyes see more than your mind can process, so memory fills the gaps, reconstructing rather than recording. When you glance away, the stored image may not match the one you return to, leaving you with the uneasy sense that the view has changed behind your back. Yet in history and folklore, such shifts were often seen as signs of hidden forces at work, spirits crossing a threshold, omens revealing themselves only to those who noticed the smallest inconsistencies. Travelers once spoke of landscapes that seemed to rearrange, as though the land itself moved in secret while they rested. Even in modern life, the window scene shift persists in its quiet mystery. Looking out of an office tower, a commuter might feel the skyline itself has shifted slightly. In a childhood bedroom, the trees beyond the glass may seem alive, altering their shape when unseen. The effect is fleeting, and yet it lingers in memory, raising an unspoken question. How much of what you see is stable, and how much is a story your mind is stitching together each time you turn your head? In this small dissonance lies a reminder that the world outside your window is never fixed, but always in motion, reshaped by perception as much as by time itself. Imagine standing in an ordinary place, perhaps waiting at a train platform or sitting at a cafe, when a sudden certainty washes over you. You feel as though you have already seen what is about to unfold. The stranger who will drop their bag, the laugh that will ripple through the air, even the shape of the shadow stretching across the floor, each detail seems pre-written, waiting only to play itself out. This is the strange quiet of the future snapshot sense, the belief that you have already glimpsed a moment that has not yet happened. Psychologists often describe it as a form of déjà vu, the brain's memory systems briefly misfiring so that the present is mislabeled as something already stored. But the sensation carries a different weight. It feels less like remembering and more like prediction. Studies have shown that when people report such visions, they often describe them not as hazy or uncertain, but as precise frames, as if a photograph of the future had been filed into the mind before reality caught up. History holds curious echoes of this feeling. Ancient oracles claimed to see fragments of events yet to unfold, often in fleeting, almost dreamlike images. The Oracle of Delphi spoke not in full stories, but in riddled glimpses, much like the way a person today might sense a single moment before it occurs. In the 19th century, diaries record individuals who described premonition flashes before accidents or discoveries, brief certainties they could not explain. Whether coincidence or intuition, such accounts share the same rhythm. a snapshot of the future mistaken for memory. Imagine yourself caught in this sensation, a flicker of time folding over itself, gifting you a momentary vision of what has not yet come to pass. Perhaps it is no more than the brain's habit of prediction, rehearsing countless possibilities until one aligns with reality. Yet in the stillness of the experience, it feels like something greater, an uncanny reminder that the future might not always be entirely separate from the present, but sometimes presses its outline against the glass of now, letting you glimpse it for just a second. Imagine yourself in the middle of a conversation, words forming easily, flowing one after another, until, without warning, the stream stops. A sentence begins but does not end. The thought vanishes, leaving only silence. You pause, searching for the missing fragment, but it is as though someone has quietly reached into your mind and erased it. This is the halted word, flow, a common yet unsettling lapse where language slips through your grasp before it ever fully arrives. Throughout history, speech has carried weight beyond simple communication. In the courts of ancient Greece, orators trained for years to command uninterrupted flow, their reputation built on the ability to persuade without faltering. Imagine the dismay of such a speaker if mid-sentence their words dissolved into nothingness, an emptiness interpreted not as forgetfulness but as a sign from the gods. In medieval Europe, sudden silence was sometimes thought of as divine interruption, the spirit halting speech to prevent something dangerous from being said. What we now call a lapse in memory was once considered an omen. Modern science explains this pause as a temporary misfire in the brain's language centers. Words live across networks, some tied to memory, others to articulation, still others to emotional resonance. If one connection stalls, the entire structure collapses, leaving the speaker stranded mid-thought. This is why the experience often feels so peculiar. You are not only forgetting a word but losing access to the very thread of meaning. And yet, moments later, the missing phrase may return unbidden, as though it had never left. In daily life, these silences carry a subtle social weight. A pause can be brushed aside with laughter, or it can draw attention, creating discomfort for both speaker and listener. In another context, it may be a relief, the mind's gentle reminder to slow down, to withhold a thought that need not be spoken. The halted word flow, then, is more than failure. It is also a threshold, a moment where the mind reminds you that speech is not endless but fragile, sustained only by delicate threads of memory and thought. And so, each time your words falter, you glimpse the invisible machinery of mind at work, complex, imperfect, yet astonishing. Silence in that instant is not emptiness, but proof that even the simplest sentence is a miracle of thought made sound. You notice a dull ache in your shoulder. It lingers, steady enough to draw your attention. But then, without warning, it fades, only to reappear in your lower back or your knee. Nothing has truly changed in your body, yet the pain itself seems to wander. This is the pain relocation effect, a quiet reminder that sensation is never fixed, but is shaped by how the brain interprets signals. Pain is not simply damage, it is information. Nerves send messages upward, and the brain decides where and how to experience them. But the map of the body is not precise. Sometimes signals blur, overlap, or even reroute. The ache of tension in the neck can be misread as pain in the jaw. A strained muscle in the leg can feel like discomfort in the hip. What we experience is not the raw message, but the brain's best guess. Daily life reveals this in subtle ways. Runners feel a sharpness in one joint, only to notice it move to another as they keep going. People recovering from illness describe pain that seems to travel through the body, as if restless. Even those without injury may feel shifting discomfort when tired or stressed, the nervous system amplifying and relocating signals as attention flickers. Cultures have long tried to explain this movement. Ancient healers believed migrating pain was a sign of imbalance, energy displaced within the body. In medieval medicine, it was linked to wandering humors, ailments thought to drift until resolved. Even today, traditions of acupuncture or massage approach pain as a shifting presence, not a fixed wound. The pain relocation effect shows how perception bends reality. The body may remain unchanged, yet the mind redraws its map of suffering. A reminder that pain is not only in the flesh, but also in the shifting pathways of interpretation. Imagine catching yourself in a small gesture, a tilt of the hand, a phrase spoken in a certain rhythm, and feeling a flicker of recognition that does not belong to you. It is as though the motion was borrowed, inherited, a quiet echo of someone who lived long before you. The genetic echo illusion is this strange sensation that traits, habits, even memories can travel through generations and arrive within you as though they were firsthand. Biology gives us one explanation in the form of epigenetics. While DNA carries the blueprint of your body, epigenetic markers can switch certain genes on or off, influenced by the experiences of your ancestors. A famine endured by a grandparent can leave traces in the body of a grandchild, shaping metabolism, heightening vulnerability, or altering resilience. It is not memory in the literal sense, but a whisper of survival encoded into the body, carried forward in silence until it is lived again. Yet the illusion stretches beyond biology into culture and psychology. Family stories, repeated so often they blur into familiarity, can take root as if they were your own. You might recall vividly the village your great-grandmother left behind, even if you never walked its streets. The tone of a voice passed down in recordings, the resemblance of a face in an old photograph, becomes enough for the mind to imagine the past as something once lived. Over time, imagination and inheritance weave together, and the echo feels like memory itself. History, too, is filled with these echoes. In communities with strong oral traditions, descendants often describe ancestral battles, migrations, or rituals with a detail so intimate it seems impossible without direct experience. Scientists might call it learned narrative, while believers call it ancestral memory. Either way, it shapes identity. You feel not only yourself, but also the long line of people whose choices, struggles, and small gestures carved the path toward your existence. The paradox is quiet but profound. The past may not truly belong to you, yet it still resides within you, through body, through story, through imagination. Imagine yourself pausing at a window, catching a reflection, and wondering whether the way you stand, the way you breathe, carries with it the faint pulse of another life, an echo, both yours and not yours, resonating across time. Imagine yourself sitting with a memory, something so familiar it feels unquestionable. Perhaps it is a story told in childhood, a fact repeated so many times it became part of you, or a detail about the world you never thought to test. Then, without warning, it collapses. You learn that what you carried as certain was never true at all. The trapdoor belief. Fall feels like stepping onto solid ground only to have it vanish beneath your feet. A teacher's lesson, a parent's phrase, a trusted recollection, suddenly revealed as mistaken. The realization is not only about the falsehood itself, but about the unsettling awareness that the scaffolding of your knowledge is less secure than you imagined. Psychologists note that memory and belief are not separate systems, but intertwined networks, constantly reinforcing one another. A belief you hold may alter the way you remember events, just as memory can be reshaped to justify a belief. Once a correction arrives, the fracture is not only intellectual, but emotional. Ancient philosophers wrestled with this same instability, describing truth as a slippery floor where certainty is rare. In the Renaissance, new discoveries about the earth and stars overturned centuries of conviction, each revelation pulling entire generations through trapdoors of disbelief. The same pattern repeats quietly in personal lives today. When you discover that a phrase you swore someone once said was never spoken, or that a family story you trusted is more myth than fact. The trapdoor belief. Fall reminds you that knowledge is not a fixed structure, but a shifting landscape. Each certainty you hold is suspended by invisible threads, vulnerable to being cut at any time. To experience the fall is unsettling, but it also opens space, a recognition that truth is not something possessed once and for all, but something continually sought. The moment the floor gives way, you glimpse how fragile your inner architecture really is, and how much of life is lived not on steady ground, but above a network of trapdoors, any one of which may open when least expected. Imagine walking through a familiar street, its rhythm etched into your memory, the cafe on the corner, the clock tower at the square, the row of shops you've passed 100 times. Yet one day, you pause. Something feels displaced. A building you were sure once stood farther down the road now rises before you in another spot. The sign above its doorway, the angle of its windows, even the texture of its bricks feel unmistakably the same, but the location feels wrong, as though the landmark itself has quietly shifted while the world wasn't watching. This is the experience of a moving landmark memory, the unsettling sense that the geography of your past has subtly rearranged itself. Psychologists often link this to the fragile way spatial memory is stored. The hippocampus does not hold maps like an atlas. It weaves places together through experience and repetition. When two streets or corners share similar cues, an awning, a tree, a familiar sign, the brain can easily misplace a building within its mental map. Later, when reality does not match the recollection, it can feel less like an error and more like the unsettling suggestion that the world itself has changed. History offers its own whispers of such distortions. Travelers in the 18th century sometimes described returning to cities only to insist that monuments stood in different positions than they had remembered. Urban legends, too, grow from this dissonance. In some towns, stories circulate of churches that moved overnight, their stones supposedly shifted by divine or supernatural will. Even in literature, shifting architecture appears as a recurring motif, symbols of memory's unreliability and the fluidity of perception. Imagine yourself tracing an old path, convinced a building once greeted you at the curve of the street, only to find it anchored elsewhere. Nothing around you confirms the memory, yet the feeling clings as strongly as fact. In that space, between certainty and reality, lies the quiet suggestion that our maps of the world are never fixed, but living, shifting reconstructions, where landmarks can move, not in stone, but in memory. Imagine yourself listening closely to a single voice, steady, familiar, belonging to someone you know well, and then, in an instant, it fractures. Instead of one continuous sound, you hear two overlapping tones, as though the speaker has split into parallel versions of themselves. It is not quite harmony, not quite echo, but something stranger, a forked perception, one voice becoming two. For a brief moment, you are caught between realities, wondering which version is true. This phenomenon has long appeared in folklore. In some traditions, a doubled voice was thought to signal possession, the intrusion of a spirit layered beneath the human. In others, it was a sign of prophecy, two truths spoken at once, one plain and one hidden. Imagine the unease of a medieval villager hearing a priest's sermon fracture into overlapping layers, convinced that something otherworldly was speaking through him. The perception of more than one voice in one body has always unsettled, precisely because voice is so deeply tied to identity. Modern science offers quieter explanations. Our brains parse voices by separating pitch, tone, and rhythm. When fatigue, echoes, or momentary misalignments in processing occur, the result can be a doubling effect. Sometimes, it is triggered by the environment, poor acoustics, a slight delay in sound transmission, or even the subtle reverberation of a room. Other times, it is entirely internal, a fleeting auditory illusion, the brain interpreting one set of vibrations as two. Daily life provides echoes of this strangeness. Think of hearing a recording of your own voice, alien and doubled against memory, or speaking on a call where a slight lag makes you hear yourself twice, unnervingly out of sync. In each case, identity wavers. Are you hearing one person or two? Is the voice unified or fractured into layers you cannot reconcile? The forked perception of voice is a gentle reminder of how fragile continuity can be. A sound you trust to represent a single person can be transformed into something multiple, shifting, uncertain. And just as quickly as it arrives, the illusion dissolves, leaving only the memory of having heard too much in a sound that should have been simple. You are moving through the day with a steady rhythm when suddenly the ground of your mood seems to collapse. Nothing has happened, no word spoken, no event unfolding, yet a heaviness spreads through you, a quiet sadness, an edge of anxiety, or a hollow emptiness. This is the emotion drop plunge, when the mind shifts its weather without offering a reason. Psychology explains it as the ebb and flow of internal chemistry. Hormones, neurotransmitters, and cycles of energy rise and fall beneath awareness. What feels like a sudden descent is often the body recalibrating. Cortisol levels may dip, serotonin may falter, or blood sugar may waver, and the emotional world responds. The mind, seeking a cause, sometimes invents one, attaching the mood to the nearest thought, even if it has no true connection. Daily life offers many glimpses of this. A song once neutral may suddenly sound unbearably heavy. A task once simple feels impossible. Even sitting quietly, you may find your heart sinking without explanation. Some describe it like a shadow passing across the sun, a reminder of how fragile equilibrium can be. History is filled with metaphors for these plunges. Ancient writers spoke of melancholia as a black bile that settled without warning. In Chinese medicine, such moods were seen as disturbances of energy flow, sudden blockages of qi. In romantic literature, poets often describe these descents as proof of a soul tuned too sensitively to the unseen rhythms of life. The emotion drop plunge reveals how moods are not always tethered to circumstance. Sometimes they rise like tides, sometimes they fall like sudden storms. It is a reminder that inner weather can shift on its own, leaving us to ride the currents until balance quietly returns. Imagine sitting quietly in a room, the air still, the walls fixed, yet your body insists the space around you is moving. The floor seems to tilt, the corners lean, the entire room drifts in a slow spin as though you were inside a carousel that never began turning. This sensation, spinning room perception, arrives without warning, unsettling because it feels real, even as you know you are still. At its root lies the delicate machinery of balance, carried within the inner ear. Tiny canals filled with fluid register motion, sending signals to the brain about tilt and rotation. When these signals misalign with what the eyes see, the mind struggles to reconcile the conflict. The result is vertigo, the impression of movement in a space that does not move. Sailors returning to land have described it, feeling harbors sway after weeks at sea. Astronauts report it upon returning from orbit, their bodies still trying to find harmony between gravity and motion. Even simple illness can trigger it, a reminder of how fragile equilibrium truly is. Across history, people have interpreted the spinning world through lenses of mystery. Ancient physicians spoke of it as the turning of the head, linking it to imbalances of bodily humors. In folklore, dizziness was sometimes a sign of spirits at play, invisible forces twisting perception. In crowded medieval towns, where fainting spells and dizzy turns were common, some believed the sensation revealed weakness of the soul. What science now understands as a vestibular misfire was once folded into narratives of possession, fate, or divine interference. And yet, beyond explanation, the sensation carries its own quiet metaphor. To feel the room spin while standing still is to experience the instability always present beneath the surface of daily life. We anchor ourselves with the illusion of steadiness, but one small shift in the body's inner currents is enough to unravel certainty. Imagine yourself resting in that uneasy moment, the chair firm beneath you, the air unmoving, yet the world gently turning as if to remind you that balance is never permanent, only borrowed from forces deeper than awareness. Imagine yourself staring at a puzzle, perhaps a crossword half finished, or a math problem left unsolved on a page. You struggled with it once, setting it aside unfinished. And yet, years later, you recall the answer clearly, as if you had found it long ago. The missing puzzle. Recall is that eerie sensation of remembering a solution you never actually reached. It feels as though your mind has borrowed knowledge from a parallel self, or written a chapter in your memory that you never lived through. The problem remains untouched on paper, but in your mind, the ending has already been written. Psychologists see this as a quirk of false memory, where the brain, eager for closure, quietly supplies the missing piece. Memory is not a recording, but a reconstruction. And when it rebuilds the past, it often fills gaps with assumptions that feel every bit as authentic as lived experience. Historians describe scholars who, upon revisiting old notes, are startled to remember, having solved ideas they never fully worked out. Artists, too, have described remembering the finished shape of works they abandoned, as if their memory had sketched an ending that never came into being. Across cultures, this phenomenon often blended with superstition, the belief that solutions arrive in dreams, or that knowledge can seep into the mind from unseen realms. In ancient Greece, oracles claimed answers could be remembered from the gods, even when never learned. Today, the same odd familiarity lingers when you recall an answer before checking, convinced you once solved it, only to realize you never did. The missing puzzle. Recall reveals the strange generosity of the mind, giving you the illusion of completion where none occurred. It comforts you with resolution while erasing the honest record of struggle. In this quiet distortion lies a deeper truth. Memory values coherence over accuracy, and sometimes the story of having solved something feels as real, or even more real, than the unsolved problem itself. Imagine reaching for a door handle only to find that your arm will not rise. There is no obstacle in your way, no rope tying you down, no barrier in the air, yet your body resists as though an unseen weight presses against your limbs. A few seconds later, the invisible lock fades, and you move freely once more. This is the quiet strangeness of the invisible chain restriction, the sensation of being bound when nothing holds you. In sleep, many know this feeling as paralysis, when the mind stirs before the body does, leaving a person awake but unable to move. Yet it can slip into waking life as well, during moments of fear, shock, or hesitation. The nervous system, overwhelmed, can hold the body still against one's will, as though freezing were its only defense. In psychology, this is called tonic immobility, a deep-rooted response seen not only in humans, but across the animal world. Rabbits stiffen in grass when threatened, birds fall silent, and people, too, can feel chained by nothing more than the body's instinct to survive. History and culture have often given this experience other names. Medieval accounts describe spirits that sat upon the chest, keeping sleepers from moving, an explanation for what we now call sleep paralysis. In some traditions, this invisible restraint was seen as punishment from unseen forces, while in others it was a sign that the spirit had briefly stepped outside the body, leaving it unresponsive. Even in modern life, people speak of freezing up during speeches or crises, their minds urging them forward while their bodies refuse to obey. Imagine yourself in that moment, your thoughts moving quickly, your intention clear, but your body held still as though wrapped in chains made of air. The ground feels heavier, the air thicker, and time stretches while you wait for control to return. When it finally does, you are left with the lingering knowledge that freedom of movement, something taken for granted, can be withdrawn without warning. The chains were never real, yet their grip was undeniable, reminding you how thin the line is between will and action. Imagine yourself walking through a forest path, the air cool with the scent of pine and damp earth. You check your compass, and it points north with quiet certainty. Yet in your body, in the subtle pull of your instincts, something insists the needle is wrong. Every step feels misaligned, as though the ground beneath you tilts toward another direction. This is the compass drift sense, the unsettling moment when inner conviction contradicts external truth. For centuries, people relied on instinct long before they relied on instruments. Travelers read the angle of the sun, sailors trusted the wind and stars, desert nomads felt orientation through the shape of dunes and the grain of sand beneath their feet. When compasses became widely used, they were often met with suspicion. To follow a silent needle instead of one's own sense of direction seemed almost unnatural, as if giving up a deeply human instinct to an object that could not explain itself. Stories are told of explorers who ignored their compasses, convinced they were broken, only to find themselves hopelessly dead. Science shows that humans do carry a form of internal navigation. Tiny structures in the inner ear tract balance, while environmental cues like light, sound, and even subtle geomagnetic influences shape orientation. But this system is imprecise, prone to illusion. A series of turns can convince the body it is still facing one way, when in truth it has spun entirely around. In moments like these, the brain prioritizes its own flawed sense over the needle's precise pull, leaving you caught between conviction and reality. Daily life offers quieter versions of this drift. You may drive a familiar road and suddenly feel a left turn must lead north, even when you know it does not. Or you may walk through a city at dusk, convinced you are heading toward the setting sun, only to realize you are moving east. The sensation carries a peculiar disquiet, an awareness that certainty itself can mislead. The compass drift sense is more than a navigational error. It is a reminder that truth does not always align with intuition. To move through the world is to accept that instinct can fail, that what feels undeniably correct may, in fact, be entirely wrong. And in that small fracture between feeling and fact lies the quiet paradox of trust, whether to follow the body's pull or the silent certainty of a needle that does not lie. You glance at your phone and feel sure a message has arrived. For a moment, you even see it, an imagined notification, a vibration that never happened. Yet when you check, the screen is blank. This is the message residue effect, when the expectation of contact lingers so strongly that it feels real. It happens because memory and attention blur together. If you are waiting for a reply, the mind rehearses it, building the image of the notification before it exists. The vibration phantom, the faint buzz in your pocket, is the body's echo of anticipation. Even without sound or light, you can feel convinced you were reached. Daily life makes this effect common. Students awaiting results imagine they've seen the email arrive. Friends, hoping for connection, feel the pulse of a phone that never moved. Couples at a distance sometimes swear they sensed a message in the silence, only to realize it was nothing more than expectation pressing into awareness. History holds echoes of this phenomenon too. In letters of the 19th century, people described hearing the postman's knock before he came, or seeing the envelope in mind before it arrived. The slower pace of communication heightened anticipation, and the imagination filled the waiting space. In many cultures, such false signals were sometimes taken as omens, a sign that connection between people stretched invisibly across distance. Science points to selective attention and the brain's predictive nature. The mind prefers to anticipate rather than to sit in uncertainty, so it creates a moment of false contact. What feels like a received message is, in truth, your own nervous system practicing connection before it happens. The message residue effect shows how deeply humans crave response. Even in silence, the body invents signals, proving that sometimes the strongest messages are the ones we send to ourselves. Imagine walking along a quiet path, the rhythm of your steps steady and unbroken. Suddenly, you anticipate a dip in the ground, a slope, a step, an uneven patch of earth. Your body prepares before your mind can question it. Muscles tighten, balance shifts, your foot braces for the impact. And then, nothing. The ground is flat, solid, unchanged. What you expected never appears, and for a moment you feel the subtle jolt of preparing for something that wasn't there at all. This is the pre-step ground test, a fleeting illusion where the body acts on predictions the world does not confirm. The explanation lies in the brain's constant work of forecasting. Each step you take is not simply a reaction to what lies beneath, but a prediction of what should come next. Based on memory, environment, and subtle cues, the mind builds a map of expectation. When that expectation fails, even slightly, the result is a dissonance you can feel in your bones. Studies of gait and balance reveal how finely tuned this system is. People walking down staircases often experience a sudden stumble when they think one more step remains, the body already bracing for a drop that never comes. History and daily life both offer echoes of this misstep. Soldiers, marching in formation on uneven ground, were once trained to adjust instinctively, to anticipate dips and rises before they appeared. Travelers crossing ancient stone roads likely felt the same small betrayals of balance when their eyes misread the pattern of cobblestones. Even in the polished corridors of modern buildings, a misplaced expectation can summon the same lurching sensation, a reminder that certainty in movement is always built on prediction rather than guarantee. The paradox is gentle but revealing. You trust the ground, yet in truth you trust your mind's story about it more. When that story falters, your body feels the tremor of surprise, even in the absence of danger. Imagine yourself pausing in that moment, your heart steadying, your step recalibrating, as the earth beneath you proves both reliable and strangely unpredictable at once. Imagine yourself recalling a photograph where you are meant to be the center, the tilt of your head, the curve of your smile, the way you thought you looked in that moment, but when the image rises in memory, it does not remain entirely your own. The features begin to blur, softening into another person's face. A stranger's outline creeps in, or perhaps the memory bends toward a friend, a sibling, or a figure you cannot quite name. This is the self-blurring memory, a subtle distortion in which your sense of identity melts into someone else's reflection. You are both present and absent, the remembered figure shifting as if your mind has forgotten how to draw you clearly. Psychologists suggest this is tied to the malleability of self-image. The brain does not store a fixed portrait, but a fluid collage of impressions, updated and overwritten across time. When memory reaches for the image, it may borrow details from others around you, those you admired, envied, or spent countless hours beside. Ancient myths often spoke of the self as a mirror that could be clouded, reflecting not just the individual, but the faces of kin and community. In family lineages, stories were told of children remembering themselves in the faces of ancestors they never met, as if the past lived through their own reflection. Even in ordinary life, the effect is quietly unsettling. You may think back to childhood, picturing yourself in a classroom, and yet the child's face you summon does not feel entirely yours. Or you revisit a memory of a gathering, and the self you recall seems to share traits with someone else who was there. The mind, in its search for coherence, weaves identities together, mistaking overlap for truth. The self-blurring memory reminds you that identity is less stable than it feels. Who you are in recollection is not always who you were, but a shifting mask composed of borrowed fragments. In this gentle distortion lies a deeper reflection. The self you hold on to is never singular, but always part of a larger fabric, where your face and the faces of others bleed into one another, leaving you uncertain where you truly end. Imagine sitting in stillness when a sound rises faintly in your mind, the sharp ring of an alarm, urgent and insistent, yet the room around you is silent. You check your phone, your clock, even the street outside, but nothing stirs. The alarm has no source, no machine behind it, and yet it echoes as clearly as if it had just demanded your attention. This is the strange pull of the forgotten sound alarm, hearing a warning that never truly began. Psychologists might trace this sensation to the mind's deep habit of anticipation. Alarms are designed to cut through distraction, and so their patterns carve strong pathways into memory. Once learned, the brain may reproduce them on its own, especially in moments of quiet or tension, Just as you might hear a familiar song in your head without meaning to, the mind can replay the sound of alerts, except, in this case, the effect is sharper, laced with the expectation that something requires immediate response. Across history, phantom alarms have taken on different meanings. Sailors in the age of exploration sometimes reported hearing bells at sea, signaling dangers that never arrived. In medieval towns, people claimed to hear church bells or fire signals in the dead of night, stirring whole communities into action before realizing no such call had been made. These false alarms became part of folklore, seen either as omens or as tricks of the restless mind. Even in modern times, individuals report hearing the buzz of a phone that never vibrated or the faint echo of a siren long before one actually passes by. Imagine yourself in that moment. Your pulse quickens, your attention sharpens, yet the world offers no confirmation of the sound. The alarm fades as suddenly as it began, leaving behind only the uneasy awareness that the mind can generate its own signals of urgency. In that fleeting echo lies a paradox, the noise of something that never was, a warning without a source, and a reminder that not every sound we hear belongs to the outside world. Imagine yourself searching through a drawer for an old possession, a watch, a book, a scarf you are certain belonged to you. You remember its weight, its color, the way it felt in your hand. Yet no matter how long you search, it never appears, because it never existed in your care. This is the object swap recall, when the mind insists on a memory of ownership that reality never granted. It is not the absence of memory, but the presence of a false one, so vivid that doubt feels like betrayal. Throughout history, this confusion has left its mark. Families have quarreled over heirlooms, each person recalling with conviction that a ring or a vase was once theirs. Medieval courts heard disputes where memory alone served as testimony, and in such cases, the certainty of possession often outweighed any lack of proof. Imagine a villager swearing that a silver cup belonged to his household because he could picture it on his table, only for records to show otherwise. Memory, polished by repetition, becomes as persuasive as evidence. Modern psychology explains these misremembered belongings as the blending of lived experience with suggestion. The brain stores fragments, seeing a neighbor's toy, admiring a cousin's book, and later weaves them into the fabric of self. When the mind replays such images often enough, the boundary between admiration and ownership dissolves. What you once desired or handled briefly can be reclassified by memory as something you possessed. It is not deception, but a natural side effect of how recollection reconstructs rather than retrieves. In daily life, the sensation can be both comforting and unsettling. You might insist that you once owned a particular jacket, only to realize it belonged to a sibling. Or you might vividly recall a childhood toy, its edges worn smooth, only to discover it existed only in a neighbor's house. These moments reveal the fragility of memory, how it quietly edits and rewrites to give us a sense of continuity and self. The object swap recall reminds you that possessions exist not only in the physical world, but also in the mind's private archive. In that archive, ownership is as much about meaning as material. Whether or not the object was ever truly yours, the memory of it carries weight as though belonging itself can be conjured simply by remembering. You place your hand on ice, and for a strange instant, it feels warm. The surface is freezing, the temperature undeniable, yet the first sensation carries a flicker of heat. This is the warm ice paradox, a reminder that the body's sense of temperature is not direct truth but interpretation. The skin does not measure hot and cold like a thermometer. Instead, it detects change. Nerves tuned to rising or falling temperature send signals to the brain. When the drop is sharp and sudden, as with touching ice, the nervous system misfires. The shock of extreme cold is read by the same receptors that respond to burning heat. The result is confusion, a brief moment when freezing and warmth blur into the same feeling. Daily life reveals this in small ways. Cold metal touched in winter may feel almost scalding. Snow pressed against the palm can mimic the sting of fire. Even plunging into icy water often begins with a burning sensation before the chill sets in. These moments show how perception bends, how easily boundaries of sensation overlap. Cultures have long noticed this overlap. Ancient healers described frostbite as a fire of winter, noting that the pain of cold mirrored the pain of flame. In folklore, ice and fire were often paired as twins, opposites yet strangely similar in the way they touch the body. The Norse myths even placed creation between realms of searing heat and frozen void, as if both belonged to the same spectrum of extremes. The warm ice paradox reminds us that sensation is not fixed in the world but shaped within us. What feels like truth is often the brain's attempt to interpret signals it cannot fully untangle. In that fleeting warmth from the coldest surface, we glimpse the fragility of perception itself. Imagine stepping into a room you know well, one you've entered countless times before. Perhaps it's your living room, the quiet corner of a library, or a hallway at work. Yet today, something feels different. The ceiling seems higher, the walls more distant, the space itself stretching wider than memory allows. On another day, that same room might feel tighter, more compressed, as though the walls have leaned closer overnight. This is the sensation of room size alteration, the subtle shift in how a familiar space is perceived, leaving you quietly unsettled. The cause is not in the architecture, but in the mind. Our sense of space relies on many cues: the angle of light, the rhythm of shadows, the body's position, even the mood carried within us. A well-lit room in the morning may seem expansive, but under dim evening light it can feel smaller, more enclosing. Psychological research shows that stress, fatigue, or altered states of attention can distort spatial judgment, bending perception without moving a single wall. The brain, always reconstructing reality from fragments, sometimes recalibrates the size of the world around you. Cultures throughout history have noted this shifting sense of scale. Medieval monks described their cloisters as both vast and narrow depending on the hour of prayer, interpreting the change as a spiritual reflection rather than a perceptual one. In folklore, travelers wandering through enchanted places often reported that cottages or halls seemed to swell or shrink, an effect that storytellers wove into tales of magic. Even today, children returning to their old schools often remark that hallways once immense now feel impossibly small, their memories outgrown by their bodies. The paradox rests in the instability of familiarity. A room you trust, a space you know, is not fixed in experience. It expands and contracts depending on mind, body, and time. Imagine yourself lingering in that altered room, aware that the floor has not moved, the ceiling has not shifted, and yet the world feels different. The room remains unchanged, and still it reminds you that perception is never a perfect reflection, but a living interpretation, reshaping the spaces you call your own. Imagine yourself pausing before a mirror, gazing into your own eyes. They are the color you have always known, familiar, steady, unchanging. And yet, somewhere deep in memory, you recall them differently, perhaps lighter, with flecks of green that aren't there now, or darker, almost shadowed. The recollection feels vivid, as though at one point you looked into the same mirror and saw another shade staring back. This is the eye-color drift, the quiet illusion where memory convinces you that something constant about your body has shifted. It unsettles because it touches what seems most stable, your eyes, the windows through which you view the world, yet even they cannot escape the distortions of recall. Psychologists link this to the way memory preserves impressions rather than precise detail. You do not store the exact pigment of your eyes like a swatch, but instead hold on to emotional snapshots, how they looked in sunlight, in photographs, in fleeting glances others describe to you. Over time, those impressions bend and overlap, until a remembered version emerges that does not match the reality in the mirror. Across cultures, such shifts were often given mystical meaning. In folklore, a sudden change in eye color signaled possession, transformation, or a soul touched by otherworldly forces. Ancient poets wrote of lovers' eyes as storms that could change hue with passion or grief, blurring the line between perception and myth. In ordinary life, the eye color drift often appears when revisiting old pictures. You may be surprised that your eyes seem brighter or dimmer than you remembered, as though a different self once looked back at the camera. Friends, too, might remark on shades you never noticed, adding to the quiet uncertainty. The drift reveals how much of your identity rests not on fixed truth, but on fragile perception. What you carry is not the literal record of your gaze, but the remembered feeling of having been seen. In this small distortion lies a deeper realization. Even the most enduring parts of you, the features you thought were anchors, are filtered through memory's restless tide. Imagine searching frantically for a document you are certain should be on your desk. You shuffle through every sheet, open every drawer, and even retrace your steps to places you haven't visited in weeks. Resigned, you give up, convinced the file has vanished for good. Then, hours later, without explanation, it appears in the very spot you first looked, lying in plain sight, as though it had been quietly returned while your attention wandered. This is the file reappearance effect, the strange, unsettling sense that what was lost has reinserted itself into reality. Psychologists often describe this as a failure of attention. When stress narrows focus, the brain can overlook the obvious, filtering it out as background. In hindsight, it feels impossible that you could have missed something so large. But perception is never a perfect mirror. It is a shifting lens, selective and fragile. Studies in cognitive psychology reveal that inattentional blindness can cause people to miss glaring objects, even in full view. Only later, when the mind relaxes, do the same eyes finally register what was there all along. History offers curious echoes of this experience. Monks in medieval scriptoria wrote of holy texts appearing back on shelves after days of being lost, seen as proof of divine guardianship over sacred words. In households across centuries, stories circulate of keys, letters, or books that vanished only to return exactly where people swore they had searched. Folklore often attributed these shifts to mischievous spirits or household guardians, weaving everyday forgetfulness into supernatural tales. Imagine yourself returning to the desk where the missing paper now lies. Relief washes over you, but so does a quiet unease. Was it truly absent before, or had your mind simply erased it? The object hasn't moved, yet your memory insists that it did. In that gap between certainty and perception lies the enduring mystery that sometimes the world feels less like a fixed stage and more like a shifting play, where props appear and vanish according to rules we do not fully understand. Imagine yourself holding a coin between your fingers, the metal cool and familiar. You flick it upward, watching it spin, catching the brief glint of light as it turns. Before it lands, before it slows, you feel a sudden certainty. You know, without reason, that it will be heads or tails. The outcome has not yet revealed itself, and yet your body reacts as though the future is already written. This is the coin flip destiny, the quiet conviction that chance events are predictable, even when logic insists they are not. For centuries, coins have carried weight as arbiters of fate. Roman soldiers flipped them before battles, letting the fall of metal guide decisions of life and death. In medieval markets, merchants used them to settle disputes quickly, trusting the impartial spin more than argument. Imagine the tension of such moments, where belief in luck and certainty intertwined. A person might swear they felt the answer before the coin struck the ground, as though destiny whispered truth a heartbeat early. Modern psychology calls this anticipatory certainty an illusion of prediction. The brain, wired to detect patterns, struggles with randomness. Faced with uncertainty, it grasps for order, converting stray sensations, timing, sound, expectation, into a conviction of knowledge. In truth, no insight exists. The coin has no memory, no bias toward one side. But to the mind, A flash of feeling can masquerade as foreknowledge. The sensation is powerful precisely because it mimics intuition, the same faculty that has kept humans alive by predicting weather, danger, or movement in shadows. In daily life, this illusion extends beyond coins. A student waiting for exam results, a gambler watching dice roll, a traveler predicting which train will arrive first. All may feel the surge of destiny, the unearned certainty of knowing. When the guess proves correct, it confirms belief. When wrong, the mind quietly forgets. Either way, the feeling persists, surfacing whenever chance places us in suspense. The coin flip destiny reveals how deeply we long for control. Even in randomness, we reach for a thread of order, a whisper that tells us the future is not entirely beyond our grasp. And though reason reminds us it is chance alone, the heart insists otherwise, savoring the illusion that destiny can be felt just before it is seen. You sit in a quiet room and stare at a wall. At first, it seems still, unmoving as walls should be. But then, almost imperceptibly, it seems to draw closer, then retreat. A pulse, as though the solid surface is alive. This is the wall pulse illusion, a subtle trick of perception, born from the fatigue of steady gaze and the restless nature of the eye. Vision is not passive. Even when you try to hold your sight on a fixed object, your eyes shift constantly, making tiny adjustments to refresh the image. Without those adjustments, the receptors in the eye would fade and the world would dissolve into blur. But when the eyes struggle to stabilize on a broad, featureless surface, the brain interprets the micro-movements as changes in depth. The wall does not move, yet perception makes it breathe. Daily life can bring this quietly uncanny sensation. A long stare at painted plaster may cause it to ripple. Ceiling tiles can seem to rise and fall when you are tired. Even mountains in the distance, when watched too long, may appear to inch closer before drifting away again. The world remains solid, but sight introduces its own rhythm. Cultures and traditions have often linked such perceptions with states of mind. Mystics described walls that opened during prayer or meditation, seeing the shift as a sign of inner transformation. In some folklore, the pulsing of still objects was taken as evidence that the world itself was alive, every stone carrying a hidden heartbeat. The wall pulse illusion reveals how vision is never neutral. What appears solid and unmoving can, under the strain of attention, become fluid. A reminder that even the most stable parts of reality waver when filtered through the fragile machinery of the eye. Imagine touching your arm and, without warning, recalling the sharp sting of a safety pin piercing skin. The image is vivid, the tiny click of metal, the sudden flash of discomfort, the way the spot might have reddened. And yet, when you search memory more carefully, you realize it never happened. No such injury marked your past. No scar ever formed. This is the safety pin memory, the uncanny sensation of recalling pain that was never endured. Psychologists recognize this as a form of false memory, where imagination and memory blur so seamlessly that invention feels like recollection. The mind is not a vault of exact records, but a storyteller, always piecing together fragments to form coherence. When you imagine an event with enough detail, perhaps inspired by watching someone else's accident, or by the expectation of what such pain would feel like, the line between memory and thought thins. The body even participates, producing a ghostly echo of sensation, as though preparing itself for a danger that never arrived. Experiments in cognitive science have shown how easily this can occur. In studies, participants asked to imagine common childhood events, like spilling punch at a wedding or getting lost in a mall. Later, remembered these events as though they were real, often with great confidence. Memory does not simply preserve, it fabricates, editing the past to match expectation. The safety pin. Memory is a small version of this process, intimate and bodily, where the imagined pain convinces you it was lived. History offers broader echoes of this illusion. In some cultures, phantom injuries or remembered wounds were linked to ancestral suffering or to the presence of spirits. Soldiers, after war, sometimes reported scars they swore had once existed, only to find unmarked skin. The boundary between memory and imagination has always been porous, and pain, so immediate, so primal, makes that boundary even easier to cross. The paradox is gentle but sobering. You can feel convinced by a past that never was, carrying scars of imagination rather than experience. Imagine yourself pausing in that moment of false recollection, tracing the outline of an injury that never marked you, realizing how fragile the fabric of memory truly is. What you carry as your history is never absolute. It is a shifting script, written and rewritten, where even pain can be borrowed from thought alone. Imagine yourself lifting a bag you carry every day. You know its weight well, the familiar pull on your shoulder, the small strain in your hand. Today, though, something is off. You lift it, and it feels heavier, denser, as though unseen objects have slipped inside. You check, but nothing has been added. The bag weight change is subtle but disorienting, a moment when your senses betray you, insisting on a shift that logic denies. The fabric, the straps, the objects inside remain the same, yet the burden presses differently, as if the bag has quietly rewritten its weight. Psychologists would describe this as a product of perception rather than reality. Your sense of weight depends not only on mass, but on expectation, fatigue, and subtle changes in posture. If your body is tired, the same load feels magnified. If your attention is distracted, the act of lifting registers as more effortful. Even professional weightlifters report that familiar weights can feel inconsistent, depending on mood, muscle tension, or even time of day. Yet beyond physiology, the bag weight change has long been folded into folklore. Travelers once spoke of cursed satchels that grew heavier the farther they were carried, as if punishing the journey. In some traditions, invisible spirits were said to slip unseen stones into a wanderer's pack, a metaphor for burdens of memory or guilt pressing themselves into the present. In modern life, the phenomenon is no less haunting. You might carry the same backpack to work, convinced it weighs more than yesterday, or lift a suitcase that seems impossibly heavy until a second try proves it ordinary. The experience lingers because it questions trust in your own senses. Weight should be one of the most objective measures of the world, but in truth it is shaped as much by the mind as by matter. The bag weight change reveals the delicate balance between perception and reality, reminding you that even what feels solid and measurable is never entirely fixed. It bends under the quiet influence of body, memory, and expectation. Imagine standing before a photograph you've seen countless times. Perhaps it hangs in a hallway or rests inside an album worn soft at the edges. One day, as your eyes drift across it, you notice something is not as it was. A face seems turned at a slightly different angle. A shadow falls in a place you do not recall, or an object in the background seems to have shifted its shape. You search your memory, certain you would have remembered this detail, but no trace of change is found. No one has touched the frame, no editing has been done, yet the picture feels altered. This is the quiet unease of the frame content shift, when an image, fixed by time, seems to slip out of certainty. Psychologists suggest that memory may be the culprit. Each time you revisit an image, your mind reconstructs it, filling in details not only from the photograph itself, but from your associations, emotions, and past encounters. Over time, the remembered version of the picture may differ from the real one, so when you look again, the contrast feels like change. To the brain, however, this mismatch is indistinguishable from reality. It feels as though the picture itself has shifted. History preserves echoes of this sensation. In the 19th century, visitors to early photography exhibitions sometimes claimed that portraits moved when they returned days later, convinced the subject's expressions had softened or darkened. In folklore, painted icons and sacred images were believed to alter themselves in response to prayer, weeping or glowing faintly in candlelight. Even today, Museum curators occasionally receive reports from guests who insist that details in paintings appear different on separate visits, though no changes have been made. Imagine yourself standing before such a frame. You lean closer, searching for signs of tampering, yet the surface is smooth, untouched. Still, the unease lingers, the sense that reality inside the frame is not fully anchored, but pliable, bending with memory and perception. In that uncertainty lies the quiet reminder that even fixed images are not immune to time's most subtle distortions, the shifting of the mind itself. Imagine yourself picking up a tool you've never handled before, a hammer, a chisel, a pair of old garden shears. The moment it rests in your palm, it feels strangely familiar. The weight settles as though shaped for your grip, the balance natural, the gesture of use already rehearsed. For a moment, you are convinced it belongs to you, not as new discovery, but as old companion. This is the tool familiarity mirage, the curious sensation of comfort without history, of belonging without past experience. In earlier centuries, such feelings were often taken as signs of destiny. A blacksmith's apprentice who handled an unfamiliar hammer with ease might be said to have the craft in his blood. A knight who raised a sword with uncanny grace could be called chosen by fate. Tools, in these stories, were not just objects, but extensions of lineage and calling. Imagine a carpenter's child reaching for a saw for the first time, the villagers murmuring that the hand already knows what the mind has yet to learn. Science offers gentler explanations. The human body is adept at recognizing balance, texture, and symmetry. When an object aligns with our natural movements, it feels instantly intuitive, even if we have never touched it before. The brain maps tools into its sense of the body itself, extending awareness into handle and blade, as though the tool were another limb. Sometimes, a tool matches this mental architecture so seamlessly that it feels like an old possession. The familiarity is an illusion, but it is also a reflection of how well our minds adapt. In daily life, the sensation can be quietly surprising. You might borrow a friend's pen and feel it glide across the page as if you'd always written with it. Or you might pick up a musical instrument for the first time and sense, however faintly, that it already knows your touch. These moments blur the boundary between memory and immediacy, making the unknown feel remembered. The tool familiarity mirage reminds you that comfort is not always proof of experience. Sometimes it is simply the harmony of body and object, a convergence so natural it convinces you of a past that never was. In that illusion lies a subtle truth, that the line between memory and instinct is thinner than we realize, and the hands often claim histories the mind cannot confirm. You sit quietly, but your legs move as if cycling. The rhythm is faint, muscles twitching, knees shifting, as though the memory of pedaling still lingers in your body. This is the pedal echo motion, when repeated activity leaves a trace strong enough to replay even in rest. It happens because the nervous system learns patterns. Repetitive motion, like biking, walking, or rowing, carves deep grooves of habit into the body's circuits. Long after the task ends, those pathways may fire again, sending the body into ghost-like rehearsal. Athletes often describe this as muscle memory, but here it is less deliberate, an afterimage of action etched into the muscles themselves. Daily life offers many glimpses. After a long day of cycling, you may feel your legs moving in bed as if the pedals are still beneath you. Swimmers speak of their arms shifting as though cutting through imagined water. Even office workers notice their fingers tapping invisible keyboards after hours of typing. The body does not always stop when the task is over. It continues, echoing what it has practiced most. Across history, this persistence has been noted. Medieval monks who copied manuscripts for hours often described their hands writing letters in the air when they tried to sleep. Sailors spoke of phantom rocking in their legs after weeks at sea, their bodies still moving with imagined waves. Cultures often linked such motions to the soul's restlessness, as though the spirit kept working after the flesh had ceased. The pedal echo motion shows how deeply the body remembers. Effort leaves not only fatigue, but patterns, grooves that replay themselves long after the world has stilled. Even in quiet moments, you carry the rhythm of what you have done, proof that the body does not easily forget its own momentum. Imagine sitting in a room where the lamp has not moved, its glow steady and unchanged. Yet as your eyes wander, you notice a shadow bending in the wrong direction. The curve of a chair's outline points away from the light, as if the rules of illumination have quietly shifted. You blink, adjust, look again, and though nothing in the room has altered, the sense lingers. The light has betrayed you. This is the light source betrayal, the disquieting perception that shadows fall where they should not, despite a steady source. The roots of this illusion lie in the delicate partnership between vision and expectation. Your brain is always predicting how light behaves, drawing on years of pattern and habit. When shadows contradict those patterns, because of multiple reflections, hidden sources, or the angle of your gaze, the brain hesitates. For an instant, it cannot reconcile geometry with perception, and what results feels uncanny. Psychologists note that even subtle inconsistencies in shadow direction make computer-generated images appear wrong, revealing how deeply we depend on shadow cues to judge reality. Across history, shifting shadows have stirred imagination. Ancient storytellers used them to explain the presence of unseen forces, believing errant shadows marked the influence of spirits or gods. In medieval cathedrals, the flicker of candlelight across stone statues often made figures appear to move, their shadows bending in directions that defied logic. Even today, architects and stage designers play with this effect, manipulating hidden light sources to create the impression of space bending or objects looming larger than they are. The paradox is quiet, but unsettling. Shadows are meant to confirm the world's solidity, yet they can also betray it. A steady lamp should anchor the room, but your eyes remind you that certainty is fragile. Imagine yourself pausing in that moment, tracing the impossible fall of a shadow, realizing that even the simplest truths, light and dark, depend not only on physics, but on perception's fragile trust. Imagine yourself entering a quiet room at dusk, the light stretched thin across the floor. Your eyes fall on the shadow of a chair leg, the dark outline steady and sharp. But when you look again, the chair is no longer there. Only the shadow lingers, clinging faintly to the wall or the ground, as if the object has slipped away, but its trace remains. This is the missing item shadow, a subtle trick of perception where absence feels incomplete, as though reality forgot to erase the final mark. For a breathless moment, it unsettles. The world should be consistent, yet here it wavers, showing you a ghost of form without substance. Psychologists explain such impressions through afterimages and memory overlays. The eye, dazzled by sudden changes in light, continues to project outlines where they no longer belong. At the same time, the brain leans heavily on expectation. When an object has occupied a space for so long, its absence feels unnatural, and the mind fills in what it assumes should be there, leaving a phantom shadow behind. In history, such phenomena often carried a different weight. Ancient storytellers described lingering shadows as remnants of souls, a reminder that nothing fully disappears. In some cultures, shadows themselves were thought to be independent, capable of persisting even when the body moved on. In everyday life, you might notice this effect when shifting furniture, your vision still catching the dark impression of what once stood in the corner, or in a street at twilight, where a lamppost removed months ago seems to leave behind a thin outline in memory, tricking you into believing you see it again. The missing item shadow is a quiet reminder that perception is layered, not instant. Your senses do not simply register the world, they cling to it, reluctant to let go. In this lingering mismatch, you glimpse how the mind resists impermanence, holding on to outlines even after substance has vanished. Imagine walking under a night sky, convinced you remember last evening's moon, a sharp crescent low on the horizon, or a swollen disk nearly full. Yet when you glance upward tonight, the phase is wrong. The curve bends the other way, or the fullness comes too soon. Your memory insists the shape of the moon was different, but the sky tells another story. This is the moon phase error, the vivid yet false recollection of the moon's shifting face. Astronomers remind us that the moon's cycle is steady, moving from crescent to gibbous to full with quiet regularity. But human memory is far less precise. Studies show that even frequent observers misremember the timing of lunar phases, often swapping waxing for waning or confusing which side of the disk holds the light. The mind stores the impression of a moonlit night but rarely preserves its exact geometry. Later, when recalled, the details are reconstructed, not retrieved, an act of imagination as much as memory. History is filled with accounts of such mistakes. Farmers' almanacs recorded debates over when the true harvest moon appeared, with villagers swearing their recollection of its brightness matched a night that did not align with astronomical tables. Sailors, navigating by moonlight, sometimes logged contradictory phases in their journals, evidence of how easily memory could diverge from the sky's unbroken rhythm. Even poets and painters often captured moons in phases that did not match the dates they described, blurring memory and artistry into one. Imagine yourself beneath that uncertain sky, your mind holding fast to an image that does not exist. You trace its curve, sure of its glow, only to realize the heavens offer a different answer. In that gap lies a gentle paradox. The moon is constant in its cycle, yet in memory it shifts, reshaped by time, perception, and the mind's own imperfect orbit. The moon you recall may not be the moon that was, but it is no less real in the quiet landscape of remembrance. Imagine yourself passing a mirror in a quiet room. You turn your head, expecting to meet your own gaze, but for an instant it feels reversed. The reflection seems to notice you first. Its eyes appear already fixed, already aware, as though your image acted before you did. This is the reversed gaze echo, a subtle dislocation where cause and effect trade places, leaving you unsure of who is initiating the act of looking. For centuries, mirrors have unsettled as much as they have fascinated. Ancient myths often treated reflections as living doubles, souls trapped in glass, spirits echoing human movement. In certain cultures, people covered mirrors after a death, fearing the reflection might capture what lingers. Imagine the unease of a Renaissance scholar studying his own likeness by candlelight, convinced that his mirrored eyes shifted a heartbeat before his own. Such small delays, barely perceptible, were often taken as signs of the uncanny, proof that the image in the glass was not merely imitation, but companion. Modern science describes this sensation through perception's timing. The brain takes fractions of a second to process sight, meaning what you feel as instant is already delayed. If your attention drifts, even slightly, the reflection can seem to anticipate, as though the eyes in the glass are not bound by the same rhythm. Add to this the human tendency to detect agency everywhere, a survival reflex from ages past, and the reflection can seem imbued with its own will. In daily life, these moments are rare but striking. A sudden glimpse in a darkened window, a polished surface catching your movement sooner than expected, and the illusion takes hold. The mind, sensitive to subtle cues, convinces you that the mirror has acted first. For a breath, you are both observer and observed, caught in a loop that feels less like physics and more like conversation. The reversed gaze echo is not proof of another presence, yet it lingers as though it were. It reminds you that even something as familiar as your own reflection can slip into mystery, persuading you that identity itself might be shared, mirrored, or doubled in ways you cannot quite explain. You glance at the calendar or jot down a note, only to realize the date you wrote belongs to another day. Perhaps you're convinced it's Wednesday when it's Friday, or you place yourself in the wrong month altogether. This is the date shift recall, the subtle dislocation where time in memory and time on the clock fall out of sync. Psychologists suggest it emerges from the way the brain organizes routine. Days bleed together when they follow similar patterns, and the mind uses context, meetings, meals, familiar rituals to anchor time. When those anchors blur, yesterday's framework can be mistaken for today's. The error feels natural because your internal calendar is built less on numbers and more on lived rhythm. Daily life provides endless examples. Students wake certain it is an exam day, only to find the test is next week. Travelers misplace time zones, convinced they've skipped or gained a day. Even at home, weekends can masquerade as weekdays, leaving you momentarily displaced in your own routine. The mistake feels real until the external world corrects it. Cultures have long tied meaning to these slips. Farmers once spoke of lost days when weather patterns seemed out of season, blurring the sense of time's order. Ancient rituals often used bells or dawn chants to reinforce the boundary of each day, grounding memory before it could wander. In some traditions, forgetting the true date was interpreted as a sign that one's spirit had briefly stepped outside ordinary time. The date shift recall reminds us that timekeeping is not absolute but constructed. Clocks and calendars may insist on precision, yet the mind drifts between days with ease, proving that lived time is less about accuracy and more about perception. Imagine standing before a door you've opened countless times, the familiar weight of a key resting in your hand. By habit, you reach for the lock, but without thinking, you try the wrong key. To your surprise, it slides in smoothly, turning with an ease that shouldn't be possible. For an instant, you feel certain the door has yielded, that the key has fit where it never belonged. Then, as quickly, the illusion breaks, the lock resists, the mechanism remains unchanged, and you're left holding a key that never truly fit. This fleeting dissonance is the key fit mirage. At its root lies the delicate coordination between memory, touch, and expectation. Our hands act with speed that often outruns conscious thought. Keys resemble one another, their grooves close enough that the mind anticipates a match before the lock confirms it. The sound of metal sliding, the slight give of pressure, convinces you for a second that the connection is real. Neuroscience calls this a prediction error, your brain preparing for success and briefly experiencing it, even when the physical world disagrees. Throughout history, locks and keys have carried a deeper symbolic weight, making this mirage more than mechanical. Ancient myths often describe keys as holding power not only over doors, but over destinies, guardianship, access, transformation. In medieval times, a misplaced or ill-fitting key might be read as a sign, an omen of trust misplaced or fate misaligned. Even today, in everyday life, the wrong key brushing against the right lock can stir a strange sense of possibility, as though the boundary between closed and open, belonging and exclusion, has momentarily softened. The paradox here is quiet but telling. The world appears fixed, and yet in your hands it feels pliable, as if certainty can bend for just a moment. Imagine yourself in that pause, standing before a door that seems almost willing to yield, realizing how easily trust can rest, not in what is, but in what the mind expects to be true. The key never fits, yet for a heartbeat, you believed it did. Imagine yourself repeating a phrase you've known for years, something so familiar it feels carved into memory. Perhaps it is a prayer, a proverb, or a line from a song. The words begin to flow, steady and automatic, until suddenly they shift. A wrong word slips in, not forced, but natural, as though it had always belonged there. You only notice afterward, realizing the phrase you recited so confidently was altered in your own voice. This is the script line swap, a moment when memory rewrites itself in real time, and the error feels more authentic than the truth. Psychologists often describe this as a product of semantic memory, where phrases are stored not as exact recordings, but as flexible patterns. The brain favors rhythm, meaning, and familiarity over precision. When you recall the line, it reconstructs it from fragments, pulling in substitutions that fit the cadence. Ancient oral traditions relied on this same mechanism. Bards retelling epics often altered lines slightly, yet audiences accepted the variations as if they were true. What mattered was the shape of the story, not the perfect sequence of words. Even in daily life, the mind applies this rule, making mistakes that feel smooth because they align with meaning even when they betray accuracy. The script line. Swap becomes more unsettling when tied to cherished memory. You may repeat a childhood rhyme differently than the way it was taught, or recall a film quote in words no actor ever spoke. Entire communities share these mismatches, a collective misremembering known as the Mandela effect, where the altered version feels so right that the correction seems wrong. To live through the script line. Swap is to be reminded that memory is not a fixed script, but a living performance, rewritten each time it is recalled. What you believe you know by heart is less a record than a rehearsal, vulnerable to change at any moment. And in those changes lies the quiet revelation that even the most certain words can belong as much to imagination as to truth. Imagine walking across a familiar path, pavement, packed earth, or a wooden floor, when suddenly your foot dips, as though the ground gave way for just a second. You glance down, but the surface is perfectly intact, solid as it has always been. The strange sensation lingers, as if you had stepped into a sinkhole that never truly existed. This fleeting illusion, the sinkhole step effect, can leave you quietly unsettled. How can something so certain underfoot feel so briefly untrustworthy? Physiologists suggest that such moments often come from a mismatch between expectation and sensory feedback. The brain constantly predicts how the body should move, anticipating the firmness of each step. If the muscles relax at the wrong instant, or if balance wavers even slightly, the prediction collapses. The ground hasn't shifted, but your nervous system interprets the misstep as though it had. It is the same mechanism that makes people stumble when a stair is an inch higher or lower than expected, a reminder of how much trust we place in the silent contract between body and world. History records echoes of this uncanny feeling. Ancient travelers wrote of sacred paths where the earth seemed to breathe beneath the feet, interpreting the illusion as the presence of gods or spirits. In folklore, such slips were sometimes warnings, signs of an unseen danger ahead, or reminders not to tread carelessly on cursed ground. Even in modern life, hikers occasionally describe the earth as momentarily soft beneath their boots, though no trace of instability can be found. These stories blur the line between bodily error and mystical interpretation, each seeking meaning in a simple misstep. Imagine yourself pausing after such a step, looking back at the unbroken ground. The earth is steady, yet your body insists it yielded for an instant. In that contradiction lies the reminder that perception is not always anchored in reality. The ground may be solid, but the mind moves within its own shifting terrain, sometimes allowing you to feel the world give way even when it never has. Imagine yourself hearing your name called across a crowded room. The tone, the rhythm, the warmth of it feels unmistakable. You turn, already forming words of reply, expecting one familiar face. But instead, it is someone else entirely. The voice belonged not to who you thought, but to another. This is the wrong voice recognition, a slip where the mind leaps to certainty too quickly, convinced by a fragment of sound that identity is already known. Voices, after all, are deeply personal. In the ancient world, they were sometimes thought to carry the essence of a soul. Greek orators were trained not only in argument, but in tone, believing that a resonant voice could reveal character as much as words. In many cultures, to recognize someone by voice alone was considered a mark of intimacy, a bond forged through repetition. Imagine the confusion, then, when such recognition fails, when the voice you thought belonged to kin or friend turns out to be a stranger's. Modern psychology explains this misstep as the brain's attempt at efficiency. Sound reaches the ear as a collection of frequencies, timbre, and rhythm. The mind, seeking speed, matches those fragments to its stored library of voices. In noisy or uncertain conditions, it fills gaps with the most likely candidate, much like completing a half-seen shape. Most of the time, this shortcut serves us well, allowing us to orient quickly in conversation. But occasionally, it betrays us, delivering certainty where none was deserved. Daily life offers countless instances. A phone rings and you answer cheerfully, believing it to be a friend, only to hear the voice of a colleague. Or you pick up on a single syllable in a crowded station and respond, realizing too late it was meant for someone else entirely. These moments carry a peculiar embarrassment, not just at the mistake, but at how easily trust and recognition can fracture. The wrong voice recognition reveals how fragile identity can be when filtered through memory and sound. To mishear is to be reminded that what feels like certainty is often no more than probability dressed as truth. And in that small error lies a larger lesson, that the people we know are not just in their voices, but in the fullness of presence, impossible to reduce to a single sound. You focus on the center of a target, steady and unmoving, yet after a few seconds, it seems to slide slightly off its place. The circle wavers, the center drifts, as if the mark itself is shifting beneath your gaze. This is bullseye drift vision, a quiet illusion born not from the object but from the fragile way sight is maintained. The eye is never perfectly still. Even in focus, it performs constant micro-adjustments, tiny shifts, that prevent vision from fading. On simple shapes, concentric rings, a clear bullseye, these movements can distort perception. The brain interprets the jitter of the eye as movement in the target itself, and the still image seems to drift. For archers, dart players, or anyone training their focus, this wandering illusion is an old companion. Daily life echoes with smaller versions. A clock face stared at too long may appear to twist. The button on a remote can seem to slide sideways after extended focus. Even the center of a painting may look restless if your eyes refuse to move. The object does not betray you. Rather, perception bends under the strain of fixation. History shows awareness of this effect in unexpected places. Medieval archery manuals warned that the mark itself deceives the eye when held too long. Zen archers in Japan spoke of the target becoming alive, shifting until the archer learned to release without overthinking. In such traditions, the illusion was not a flaw, but a teacher, a reminder that certainty can dissolve when stared at too intently. The bullseye drift vision reveals how even the simplest forms can evade stability. The world may hold still, yet your eyes weave movement into it, proving once again that perception is less about truth than about restless negotiation. Imagine waking in the soft dimness of morning, the sheets still warm, your body heavy with the remnants of sleep. You notice you are lying on your right side, yet in memory you are certain you drifted off on your back. The recollection feels clear, how the pillow cradled your head, how you adjusted the blanket before closing your eyes. And still, the evidence of your body disagrees. This is the bed flip memory, the subtle confusion of remembering one position yet waking in another, as though part of the night unfolded without your permission. Science explains this through the body's quiet restlessness. Even in deep sleep, muscles shift, adjusting to maintain circulation and comfort. On average, people change positions dozens of times a night, movements so smooth they rarely disturb consciousness. But memory latches on to the final moments before sleep, preserving them as if they were a lasting truth. When morning reveals a different position, the mind senses contradiction, the illusion that something has been rearranged without awareness. Across cultures, this gap between sleeping and waking has carried deeper meanings. Ancient folklore often described unexplained shifts in posture as signs of visitation, spirits brushing against the sleeper, dreams so vivid they left the body turned. In some traditions, parents would check a child's sleeping position in the morning, believing it reflected the kind of dreams that had passed through the night. The scientific explanation of rolling muscles does not erase these older interpretations. It only sits beside them, another layer on the same mystery. The paradox is gentle but enduring. Sleep is the most intimate of states, and yet it is lived half in shadow, beyond the reach of conscious memory. You believe you know how you entered it, but the body proves otherwise, reminding you of the unseen hours when the self loosens its grip. Imagine yourself lying still in that morning quiet, aware of both memories, the one of how you began, the other of how you awoke, realizing that somewhere in the middle, the story of the night became unknowable. Imagine yourself recalling a film you once loved, a story you thought you knew by heart. The characters, the scenery, the final moments, all etched into memory. Yet when you revisit it years later, the ending feels wrong. A scene you were sure existed is missing, or the resolution plays out differently than you remember. Perhaps you recall a character surviving when they did not, or a line of dialogue that seems to have vanished. This is the alternate ending recall, when your mind carries an ending that was never filmed. The dissonance is quiet, but unnerving, as though you've slipped into a version of reality where the story itself unfolded along another path. Psychologists describe this as a form of false memory, the mind's tendency to reconstruct rather than perfectly preserve. When you store a movie in memory, you retain impressions, the emotional rhythm, the themes, the feeling of closure, rather than a frame-by-frame account. Over time, those impressions may generate an ending that matches your expectations more than the original one did. Across history, storytellers played upon this tendency. Oral epics rarely ended the same way twice. Audiences accepted alternate versions without conflict, each retelling shaping the way memory carried the tale forward. Today, the same phenomenon emerges when groups of fans swear they recall a different conclusion, convinced they saw something no one else can find. Folklore often treated such dissonance as glimpses into parallel worlds where the same story unfolded with slight variations. In modern culture, it is tied to the Mandela effect, collective misremembrance that makes the false feel truer than the fact. The alternate ending recall lingers because stories matter deeply. They frame how we understand life itself. When the ending you know dissolves into something else, it is not just the film that feels unstable, it is your trust in memory's anchor. The phenomenon reveals a deeper truth. Your mind prefers coherence over fidelity. It will rewrite, reframe, even invent to preserve a sense of meaning. And so, what you remember is not always the story that was told, but the story your mind believes should have been told. Imagine slipping your arms into a brand new jacket. The fabric is crisp, the scent of dye and store shelves still clings to it, and yet as it rests across your shoulders, you are overcome with a quiet certainty. You've worn it before. The cut feels shaped to you, the weight on your arms strikes an old chord, and even the way the collar brushes your neck awakens the comfort of memory. This is the jacket familiarity pull, when something new carries the strange gravity of the already known. Psychologists might point to the way memory and sensation intertwine. Our brains are wired to seek patterns, to connect the present to the past. The stitching of the coat may echo the shape of one long lost, or the texture may mimic a blanket once carried through childhood. In such moments, recognition is not anchored in fact, but in resemblance, and resemblance is enough to stir the feeling of return. The effect is similar to déjà vu, though gentler, an emotional familiarity rather than a spatial one, where the heart insists that the new is already an old companion. Across history, clothing has held powerful associations. In medieval households, garments were passed down through generations, each carrying the weight of those who wore them before. A new coat, even freshly made, might be stitched in a style so traditional that it awakened memories older than the wearer. Folklore is filled with stories of faded garments, clothes that seemed destined for their owners, described as if they had been waiting for them all along. Even today, people speak of finding an item that feels like me, though it has never touched their skin before. Imagine yourself standing before a mirror, turning slightly as the jacket settles more comfortably with each breath. Rationally, you know it is new, untouched, unbroken in. Yet the pull remains, as if it has been recovered rather than bought, as though it belonged to you in some forgotten chapter. In that subtle weight of recognition lies the reminder that familiarity is not always tied to memory. It can arise from echoes, from patterns, from the mind's quiet hunger for home. Imagine yourself standing beneath an open sky, watching a plane carve its path across the blue. At first, it seems ordinary, steady, straight, predictable. Then, almost imperceptibly, it drifts into an angle that feels wrong. The arc seems too sharp, the tilt too steep, the curve bending in ways that defy what you know of flight. For a moment, the mind rebels, convinced you are witnessing an impossible trajectory. This is the flight path shift, the subtle illusion that bends a familiar sight into something extraordinary. For as long as people have looked upward, the sky has been a stage for interpretation. In ancient times, unusual arcs of birds were read as omens, messages from the gods, signs that fates were changing. When aircraft first appeared, they inherited this weight of meaning. Imagine a villager in the early 20th century seeing the new machines trace uncertain lines above the horizon, believing they moved with the will of spirits rather than physics. A plane's tilt against the vastness of the sky seemed almost supernatural. Modern science offers explanations grounded in perception. Depth and distance are notoriously difficult to judge against an empty sky. With no fixed background, the brain struggles to anchor movement, misinterpreting angles and speed. A banking turn, perfectly safe and ordinary, may appear impossibly sharp from the ground. Atmospheric distortion, the shifting of light at certain times of day, can further exaggerate the illusion, making the plane appear to bend in ways metal should not. Daily life provides quieter parallels. You might see a car's shadow bend across a wall and feel momentarily tricked, or notice the warped path of a bird through window glass. The flight path shift is the grandest version of this, magnified by the scale of the sky and the weight we give to flight itself. The illusion lingers because planes carry both familiarity and awe. They are routine, yet never quite stripped of wonder. The flight path shift reminds you how much perception depends on context. What seems impossible may be nothing more than misjudged distance, distorted light, or the trick of scale. Yet in that instant of disbelief, you glimpse a reminder that even in an age of engines and aerodynamics, the sky retains its power to disorient, to make you feel small beneath movements that still seem, in some quiet way, beyond explanation. You are sitting quietly when, without warning, a flavor touches your tongue. A trace of sweetness, the sharpness of citrus, the faint echo of salt. No food is near, nothing has passed your lips, yet the taste lingers as though summoned from nowhere. This is the taste memory flicker, the sudden return of flavor that belongs to memory rather than the present moment. Science explains it as a function of the brain's close link between taste, smell, and memory. The gustatory system is deeply wired to the limbic centers that store emotional experience. A powerful flavor once paired with strong feeling, comfort, longing, celebration, can reappear spontaneously, triggered by nothing more than a passing thought or even silence itself. The taste is not imaginary. The brain reactivates the same pathways as if the food were truly there. Daily life offers countless examples. The tang of childhood candy can appear years later in the middle of an ordinary day. A sip of water may suddenly feel flavored with wine once shared at a memorable table. Some describe tasting a meal prepared by someone long gone, as if memory itself was seasoning the present. Cultures have long given these moments meaning. In ancient Greece, poets described phantom flavors as the soul recalling feasts of the past. In Japan, flavors were tied to ancestral presence, believed to return during rituals of remembrance. Even today, people speak of tasting memory, treating it as proof that the past remains alive in the senses. The taste memory flicker reminds us that the tongue is not only a tool of the present, but a keeper of the past. Flavors never truly disappear. They wait, hidden in neural pathways, ready to rise again without warning. Proof that memory can be savored as vividly as life itself. Imagine sitting in silence, hand pressed gently against your chest or wrist, listening to the steady rhythm of your own heart. For a moment, the beat seems familiar and grounding, but then you notice a strange discord. The throb you feel beneath your fingertips lags behind the pulse you sense within, or races ahead of it, as if two hearts were struggling to keep time. This is the heartbeat echo delay, the uncanny perception that your body's most reliable rhythm has slipped out of sync with itself. Physiology tells us the heart is steady, but perception is less precise. The brain doesn't receive the signal of each beat instantly. Instead, it travels through layers of nerves, muscle, and attention. A slight delay between internal sensation and external touch can create the impression of misalignment. Studies show that focusing too closely on the body's rhythms can actually distort awareness of them. Athletes sometimes report the feeling of an echo in their pulse after exertion, the mind momentarily convinced of irregularity even when the heart remains steady. Throughout history, this sensation has been described with reverence and unease. Ancient physicians interpreted skipped or doubled beats as messages from the soul, moments when the heart spoke in a language beyond flesh. In folklore, a heart felt out of rhythm was sometimes seen as an omen of change, of longing, or of unseen presence near the body. Even today, people who meditate or pray for long periods often describe feeling their heartbeat shift in strange ways, as if the rhythm of the body and the rhythm of awareness were trying to find harmony. The paradox is gentle but profound. The heart, most trusted of anchors, can become a source of uncertainty. You depend on its rhythm as proof of life, yet perception can make that rhythm feel fractured, unstable, even doubled. Imagine yourself resting in that moment, the quiet room, the steady pulse beneath your fingers, the echo of another heartbeat that isn't really there. It reminds you that even the most fundamental certainties of the body pass first through the fragile lens of perception, where trust is never absolute. Imagine yourself lifting a glass to your lips, the taste so familiar you could name it blindfolded. The first sip confirms what you expect: the sweetness of juice, the bitterness of coffee, the cool clarity of water. And then, halfway through, something shifts. The flavor bends into something else entirely. Sweetness dulls into bitterness, or a tang appears where none belonged. You check again, but the drink is unchanged, the glass the same. This is the flavor swap glitch, a fleeting distortion where your senses betray you, making a constant thing seem to alter in midstream. Psychologists trace this to the fragile nature of perception. Taste is not just chemistry on the tongue, but an orchestra of memory, context, and expectation. When attention wavers or the senses cross, the flavor you expect can dissolve into one you imagine. Even fatigue or the sequence of sips can alter the experience, one swallow priming the brain differently for the next. In history, such sudden changes in taste were often described in mystical terms. Ancient texts spoke of water turning to wine as a sign of divine presence, or bitter herbs becoming sweet as proof of healing power. In folklore, a shifting flavor was sometimes seen as a warning, the drink touched by unseen forces. In ordinary life, the flavor swap glitch is both banal and haunting. Tea can seem sweet without sugar, then bitter moments later. A soda may taste flat one sip, effervescent the next. Wine connoisseurs often describe bottles opening up or changing character over the course of a single glass, though part of this is perception quietly rewriting itself in real time. The experience lingers because it touches something intimate. You trust taste to be direct, unmediated, yet here even your tongue becomes uncertain. The flavor swap glitch reminds you that experience is never fixed. What you believe is stable, even on your own palate, is shaped by context and fragile expectation. The drink does not change, but you do. revealing that reality itself is less about what is and more about what your mind, in each fleeting moment, decides it to be. Imagine reading about a well-known event, its details laid out in books, archives, and documentaries, yet feeling a stubborn certainty that it unfolded another way. Perhaps you recall a treaty signed in a different city, a battle ending with another outcome, or a historical figure delivering a line of words no record preserves. The more you compare your memory with the official account, the stronger the dissonance becomes. This is the quiet unease of history-drift certainty, the belief that the past itself has shifted, leaving your recollection stranded in an alternate version. Psychologists describe this as a feature of memory's reconstructive nature. We do not store events like photographs. Instead, the brain rebuilds them each time they are recalled, blending fact with suggestion, personal bias, and cultural influence. Over time, a memory can diverge far from its source, gaining details that never occurred or losing those that did. When shared across many people, this effect produces what researchers call collective false memory, moments when entire groups recall an event that differs from historical record. The so-called Mandela effect, where thousands swore they remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison decades before he actually passed, is only the most famous example. Yet history itself has often seemed to encourage such drift. Ancient chronicles frequently contradict one another, with scribes shaping events to fit the needs of kings or temples. Folklore, too, preserves altered pasts. Legends of victories never won or heroes who never lived, woven so deeply into cultural identity that they feel truer than the record. Even in modern times, the retelling of national events in classrooms or films can shift perception, planting false images that feel more vivid than fact. Imagine yourself standing before a monument, certain it honors something slightly different than the inscription reveals. The stone is fixed, the record clear, yet your memory resists. In that quiet tension lies the paradox. History is steady in its documents, but fluid in the mind. The past may not truly change, yet your certainty whispers that it did, reminding you that memory and history are never perfect mirrors, but overlapping currents drifting apart. Imagine yourself hunched over a puzzle, the pieces scattered across the table in a mosaic of colors and edges. One section remains stubbornly incomplete, the single missing piece nowhere to be found. You search beneath cushions, check the floor, even retrace your steps, convinced it has been lost. Then, without warning, it appears. Perhaps sitting plainly on the table where you swear you looked before, or resting on the floor in open sight. This is the lost piece materialize, the eerie sensation that what was missing has slipped quietly back into existence. In older times, such moments were often explained through superstition. Medieval households sometimes believed mischievous spirits, house elves, or trickster fae played games with objects, hiding them only to return them later. In other cultures, vanishing and reappearing belongings were seen as omens, subtle signs that the invisible world brushed against daily life. Imagine the unease of a family centuries ago, finding a lost key suddenly returned, whispering that unseen hands must have placed it there. Modern psychology frames this phenomenon as a trick of perception and memory. The mind assumes it has searched thoroughly, when in truth the eyes may have passed over the object without registering it. Once attention sharpens or light shifts, the piece becomes visible, and the brain retroactively labels it as newly arrived. The contrast between certainty, "I already checked there," and sudden discovery creates the uncanny impression of materialization. Daily life offers countless versions of this paradox. A pen reappears on a desk after being declared lost. Glasses turn up on a counter, searched twice already. A phone emerges from a pocket checked moments before. In each case, the moment of rediscovery feels larger than it should, carrying with it the faint suggestion that reality itself has rearranged to restore what was gone. The lost piece materialize reveals the fragile trust we place in memory and attention. To be so certain of absence, only to be proven wrong by sudden presence, is to glimpse how perception edits the world. Whether the puzzle piece was always there or truly appeared anew may never matter. What lingers is the subtle sense that the boundary between missing and found is thinner and stranger than it first seems. You place a key into a familiar lock, expecting the usual stiffness, but today it turns with surprising ease. No oil, no repair, no change in metal, yet the resistance you knew so well has vanished. This is the lock resistance shift, when the physical world feels altered without explanation, leaving you uncertain whether the change is in the object or in yourself. Mechanically, locks are stable devices. Small differences in pressure or angle may affect their feel, but rarely with such drama. What often shifts instead is your perception. Muscles hold tension unevenly, memory exaggerates difficulty, and the expectation of effort makes the sudden absence of it feel uncanny. The hand recalls resistance that is no longer there, and the brain interprets it as the lock itself changing. Daily life makes this effect familiar. A door handle that once stuck suddenly moves freely. A window long resistant to opening glides without effort on a different day. Tools, knobs, even zippers can surprise us with altered effort, though nothing visible has changed. What is shifting is often our own body, strength, fatigue, or subtle posture, yet the mind casts the change outward onto the object. Cultures have long associated such changes with hidden meaning. Folklore sometimes treated suddenly compliant locks as omens, signs of fortune, betrayal, or unseen intervention. In monasteries, records describe monks whispering prayers of thanks when heavy doors opened more easily, believing the divine had smoothed the way. Even today, the sensation of unexpected ease can spark a quiet unease, a suspicion that something beyond mechanics is at play. The lock resistance shift reminds us that the boundary between object and perception is never clean. What feels like the world changing is often our own shifting strength, memory, or attention. Yet in that moment, a simple key turn unsettles certainty, showing how fragile the sense of consistency really is. Imagine walking alone at night, the streets quiet, the air cool against your skin. For no clear reason, you feel watched, not with fear, but with reassurance. It is as if a presence hovers at your side, unseen yet certain, offering a shield against the silence. Perhaps you sense it just behind your shoulder, or pacing softly in step with you. Though no one is there, the feeling lingers. Protection. Invisible, but real. This is the safety presence mirage, the illusion of security conjured by the mind when nothing material provides it. Psychologists connect this to the brain's instinct for pattern and companionship. Humans are wired to detect presence, a survival mechanism from times when a hidden ally, or threat, could mean life or death. In isolation, this wiring can produce the opposite, a phantom sense of someone's nearness, not as danger, but as comfort. Soldiers, explorers, and climbers stranded in harsh conditions often describe the third man factor, an unseen companion who seemed to guide or guard them through exhaustion. The mind, facing uncertainty, invents safety as a balm against despair. History preserves these echoes as well. Ancient sailors spoke of guardian spirits walking the deck at night, their presence steadying the crew through storms. In religious traditions, guardian angels, ancestral spirits, or protective deities have long embodied this same sensation, the unseen shield that reassures in the dark. Even in daily life, a child may fall asleep more easily, believing someone watches over them, and an adult might feel calmed by the memory of a parent's voice long after the room has emptied. The paradox is gentle, even tender. You know the room is empty, the road is vacant, the silence untouched, and yet comfort flows from an imagined companion. Imagine yourself in that moment, your steps steady, your breath calm, not because of what surrounds you, but because of what the mind has chosen to weave. Safety, real or illusory, can be felt deeply enough to change experience itself. It is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful protection is not in what is present, but in what you believe to be near. Imagine yourself catching a faint scent carried on the breeze, Perhaps jasmine, wood smoke, or rain-soaked earth. It is unfamiliar, yet the moment it reaches you, a vivid scene blooms in your mind. You are transported to a place you've never stood, a memory that feels lived, though it never was. You see the outline of streets, the play of light on walls, the sense of a time and setting you cannot place in your own history. This is the scent memory bloom, where a fragrance awakens not a remembered past, but an imagined one that arrives with the weight of truth. Psychologists note that smell is uniquely powerful in its tie to memory. Scents bypass much of the brain's usual processing, connecting directly to regions responsible for emotion and recall. But when no actual memory matches, the mind still constructs one, weaving a tapestry of associations from fragments. The smell of spices might conjure a bustling market you never visited. A hint of pine resin might place you in a childhood cabin that never existed. Ancient cultures often described such moments as glimpses of ancestral memory, the past of others carried invisibly in the air. Mystics claimed that scents were messages from unseen worlds, guiding people through visions of lives not their own. Even in ordinary life, the effect can feel haunting. You may pause mid-step, convinced a smell belongs to a house you once lived in, though you never did. Travelers often report certain scents abroad feeling deeply nostalgic for places they are certain they have never visited. The scent memory bloom unsettles because it suggests that memory is not bound to personal history. It is a storyteller, willing to create entire landscapes from a single breath. The phenomenon reveals the strange generosity of perception. When faced with uncertainty, your mind fills absence with imagery, giving you memories that do not belong to your life. In the quiet bloom of an unfamiliar scent, you glimpse how porous the boundary is between what you have lived and what you only feel you remember. Imagine resting your hand on a familiar table. You know its texture well, the smoothness of polished wood, the faint grain beneath your fingertips. Yet when you touch it again moments later, something feels altered. The surface seems rougher, or unexpectedly soft, or oddly slick, as if it had changed in your absence. You check again, but the object remains the same. This is the texture swap sensation, the quiet dissonance of a surface that feels different without ever having changed. Psychologists explain this through the fragile link between touch and expectation. The skin relays countless signals, but it is the brain that interprets them, comparing present sensation with remembered patterns. A slight shift in temperature, pressure, or attention can cause the same surface to feel transformed. Even the rhythm of breathing, or the way your hand approaches, can alter the brain's interpretation. What feels smooth one moment may feel rough the next, not because the table has changed, but because perception has. History has long associated these shifts with mystery. In medieval monasteries, monks recorded accounts of sacred relics that seemed to warm or soften to the touch when held in prayer, proof, they believed, of divine presence. Folklore tells of enchanted objects whose textures shifted depending on who touched them, stones that felt sharp to the guilty and smooth to the pure. Even today, people describe beloved possessions that seem to change with mood or memory. A childhood blanket that once felt soft now feels coarse, or a ring that alternates between cold metal and comforting warmth. Imagine yourself running your fingers across a surface, pausing in quiet confusion. Nothing around you has altered, and yet the touch feels new, transformed. In that fleeting moment, you are reminded that the senses do not capture the world exactly as it is. They translate, interpret, and reshape, turning contact into experience. The surface never shifted, only your perception did. But to you, in that instant, the transformation was real. Imagine yourself sitting quietly when a thought passes through your mind, sharp, unfamiliar, out of place. It feels less like something you created and more like something that arrived, foreign yet undeniable. For a moment, you hesitate, wondering if it even belongs to you. This is the thought ownership error, when the boundary between self and idea blurs, and the mind seems to host voices that are not its own. For centuries, people explained this sensation through forces outside themselves. Ancient Greeks spoke of the Muses, divine figures whispering inspiration directly into poets' minds. Medieval mystics described their most powerful revelations as gifts, delivered whole from beyond, not authored by them but received. In darker times, unusual thoughts were seen as dangerous intrusions, planted by spirits or demons testing the soul. To feel alien to your own mind was not simply strange, but sacred or terrifying. Modern psychology sees these moments differently. The brain is a network of overlapping systems, some producing speech, others shaping imagery, others surfacing memories. At times, an idea can leap forward without the slow build of reasoning, arriving so abruptly it feels imposed. Neurologists have studied how, in certain conditions, people can experience their own inner speech as external, the brain failing to tag the source as self. The thought is real, the origin simply misfiled. In daily life, this error often appears in quieter ways. You may write down a line that feels too polished to be yours, or think of an idea so unusual you wonder where it came from. Sometimes, creativity itself feels like this: painting, composing, or problem-solving with results that feel more discovered than made. Even ordinary moments carry it. Walking down the street, you may hear your own mind suggest a phrase or image so strange you almost look around for its source. The thought ownership error is a reminder that selfhood is less solid than we assume. Your mind produces countless impressions, not all of which feel authored by the you recognize. And yet, whether they arrive gently or startle you with their strangeness, they remain part of the vast inner chorus that makes up consciousness. The paradox lingers. If a thought does not feel like yours, does that make it any less a part of you, or does it reveal just how many selves live within the mind? You step into a room, stand on a street corner, or pause in an old building, and suddenly a wave of feeling rushes over you. Joy, sorrow, unease. It comes sharply, without clear reason. This is the pinpoint emotion surge, when a place itself seems to stir emotions that do not belong to the present moment. Psychology suggests it may be the hidden work of memory. Sights, sounds, or even subtle scents can trigger emotional recall without supplying the original memory. The smell of wood polish may echo a childhood home. The draft of air through stone corridors may recall a forgotten church. The mind skips the details but leaves the feelings intact, flooding you with intensity that feels unanchored. Daily life is filled with such moments. A cafe you've never visited feels strangely familiar. A field carries a weight of melancholy, though nothing has happened there for you. Even a patch of sunlight through a window may suddenly make you feel a happiness larger than the moment deserves. The place holds no obvious meaning, yet it becomes charged with it. History shows cultures interpreting these surges as signs of deeper truths. Ancient Greeks spoke of genius loci, the spirit of a place shaping the emotions of those who entered. In Japan, Shinto tradition honors certain landscapes as inherently sacred, carrying moods that human presence only awakens. Medieval pilgrims described being overcome with tears or joy at specific shrines, crediting the power of the location itself. The pinpoint emotion surge reminds us that feelings are not always born inside us alone. They are also drawn out by the world around us, by echoes of memory, by the silent weight of history, or by the strange pull of place itself. Imagine recalling a familiar street, the curve of the sidewalk, the color of a doorway, the scent of food drifting from a nearby shop. Yet, as the memory unfolds, you realize something is off. The cafe you could swear stood on the left suddenly exists on the right. The park entrance you recall across the square seems now on the opposite side. Two places in your memory have quietly swapped, and though you know one version must be wrong, both feel equally convincing. This is the location flip recall, the unsettling sensation of places exchanging positions within the fragile map of memory. Psychologists explain this as a kind of spatial false memory. Our brains do not store precise maps the way a GPS does. but rather reconstruct location through fragments, landmarks, relative distance, habitual routes. When fragments blur, the mind stitches them together in ways that feel whole, even if they contradict reality. Experiments with navigation tasks show how easily people misplace familiar landmarks, confidently insisting on positions that never existed. The memory feels certain not because it is true, but because the story it tells seems coherent in the moment. History and culture have long reflected this instability of place. Travelers in the ancient world often wrote of returning to cities they had once known, only to find streets feeling rearranged, as though memory had shifted the architecture. Folklore often used this effect to describe enchanted spaces, where forests or villages seemed to move overnight, entrances opening where they had not been. Even today, when people revisit childhood homes, they sometimes experience this flip, doors or staircases remembered in reverse, their inner maps rewritten by time and distance. The paradox lies in how trustingly we lean on memory's cartography. You believe you know where places belong, yet the mind's map is malleable, prone to quiet rearrangement. Imagine yourself walking through such a landscape, two versions overlapping, each certain, each false in its own way. The real ground stays fixed, but in memory, places trade sides, reminding you that even the spaces you think you know can slip and turn within the shifting theater of recall. Imagine yourself listening to a steady rhythm, the ticking of a clock, the hum of a fan, the flow of a familiar song. For a fraction of a second, one beat vanishes, a note skips, or the sound drops out entirely. Yet you do not notice in the moment because your brain has already filled the silence, stitching continuity where there was none. This is the sound gap stitch, the quiet work of the mind smoothing over absence so the world feels seamless. Only later, when you reflect, do you realize something was missing, though your awareness never paused to catch it. Neuroscientists describe this as the brain's predictive coding system. Instead of passively recording, your mind constantly forecasts what should come next, and when input fails, it inserts the missing piece. Experiments show that listeners exposed to brief bursts of static over speech still hear the missing words, their perception uninterrupted. Ancient storytellers recognized this effect too, relying on rhythm and chant, knowing the audience's mind would bridge gaps in performance. In crowded villages or bustling marketplaces, people often swore they heard a friend's voice call their name through the din, even when no such sound was made. In everyday life, the sound gap stitch happens invisibly. A train rattling past may mask a moment of conversation, but you are convinced you heard the full sentence. A faulty connection on a call drops words, yet you don't notice because your brain restores them automatically. Even music, with its complex patterns, can skip without breaking the listener's sense of flow. The phenomenon is both ordinary and profound. It shows that perception is not a faithful recording, but an act of creation, an endless repair job to keep reality smooth. The sound gap stitch reminds you that silence often hides beneath the surface of sound, and that what you think you hear is part real, part imagined. In this way, every moment of listening becomes a collaboration between the world and your own expectation, a partnership so seamless you forget it is there. Imagine walking along a quiet street at dusk when your eyes catch something unsettling. A lamppost shines steadily, casting the shadows of passers-by in a clear direction. Yet your own shadow seems to drift the wrong way, bending slightly against the logic of the light. You pause, watching carefully, but the effect lingers, a faint misalignment, as if the laws of illumination had momentarily loosened. This is the shadow direction discrepancy, the eerie sensation that light and shadow no longer obey their expected order. Psychologists might trace such moments to the brain's fragile coordination of depth and perspective. Shadows are subtle, often shifting with multiple light sources, reflective surfaces, or the uneven texture of the ground. The mind, expecting clarity, can misinterpret overlapping cues, making the shadow seem to move against reason. Yet when the perception feels sharp and undeniable, it registers not as an error, but as a breach of natural law. History offers curious echoes of these experiences. In ancient Rome, reports circulated of statues whose shadows pointed in impossible directions, taken as omens from the gods. Medieval travelers told of strange valleys where shadows fell uphill rather than down, stories later explained by the distortion of slopes and angles. Even in modern times, soldiers on desert patrols described mirages where shadows stretched against the sun's course, blending fatigue, heat, and perception into a single uncanny impression. Imagine yourself pausing on a familiar path, the world unchanged, yet the shadow at your feet refusing to obey the logic of the lamp above. No one else notices, and when you look again, everything seems ordinary. Still, the moment clings, a reminder that vision is never absolute, and even the simplest truths of light can falter in the fragile lens of perception. The shadow did not rebel against the lamp. Your mind simply reshaped the rules for a heartbeat. Yet in that heartbeat, it felt as though reality itself had tilted slightly out of line. Imagine yourself opening a drawer, scrolling through a folder, or clicking through a list of documents on a screen. Your eyes pause on a file, its name, its look, its arrangement, and you feel the quiet tug of recognition. You are certain you've seen it before, though memory offers no proof. You may even recall when you last opened it, what it contained, how it made you feel. Yet when you examine more closely, you realize the file is new, untouched, a stranger wearing the mask of familiarity. This is the file familiarity trick, the unsettling moment when the mind confuses the unknown for the already known. For as long as records have been kept, people have reported similar experiences. A monk copying manuscripts in the Middle Ages might feel he already knew the words before his eyes moved across them. An archivist in a Renaissance library could swear that a book newly arrived had sat on the shelves for years. In these moments, the world of documents and records takes on the eerie quality of déjà vu, as if memory were bending back on itself. Modern psychology places such misrecognition in the same family as déjà vu. The brain relies on patterns of recognition to make sense of endless information. When a new file resembles one you've seen before, by name, by appearance, or by context, your memory systems can misfire, tagging it as familiar. This is compounded by the way memory is reconstructive, not photographic. You don't store perfect snapshots of every file you've seen. Instead, you rebuild impressions, filling gaps with associations. The mind's shortcut is efficient, but it sometimes leads you to believe a stranger is an old acquaintance. Daily life provides countless versions of this trick. You might stumble on a photo in your phone gallery and feel you've already seen it, though it was just taken yesterday. Or you may encounter a document at work and feel certain you've read it, only to discover it was created hours ago. In each case, the sensation is strangely persuasive, leaving you briefly unsettled, as though memory has conspired with imagination to rewrite history. The file familiarity trick reminds you how fragile the boundary is between recognition and illusion. To recognize is to trust your mind's archive, but that archive is imperfect, prone to inserting echoes where none exist. What lingers is not just confusion, but a quiet question. How much of what you remember is truly past? And how much is your mind convincing you of familiarity that never was? You return to a room you know well, only to pause. The chair seems slightly larger, the table smaller, the ceiling a little higher than memory insisted. Nothing has changed, yet the proportions feel altered. This is scale shift perception, the quiet dissonance when familiar objects seem to swell or shrink against expectation. Psychologists explain it through the brain's reliance on context. We do not measure objects directly. We compare them to surroundings, to our own body, to memory. When lighting shifts, when fatigue alters focus, or when memory misaligns with the present, objects may feel subtly transformed. The bookshelf has not grown, but your eyes, tired or distracted, redraw its boundaries. Daily life offers many examples. A childhood home revisited often feels smaller than remembered, the hallways narrower, the furniture diminished. Sometimes the opposite occurs. An ordinary street seems vast after a long absence. Even daily objects, like a mug or a phone, may suddenly feel outsized or toy-like in the hand. The change is not physical, but perceptual, shaped by the fragile calibration of memory and context. Cultures have long tied meaning to these shifts. Folklore sometimes described houses that grew or shrunk as signs of enchantment, their changing size proof of hidden forces. In medieval monasteries, monks recorded feelings of rooms expanding during prayer, treating the sensation as a spiritual opening. Even today, architects study how scale perception shifts in different light, sound, and mood, aware that the same space never feels exactly the same twice. Scale shift perception reminds us that solidity is not enough to guarantee certainty. Objects may remain constant, yet the mind's measure of them changes, proving that even the most familiar things can slip from stable truth into the fluid realm of perception. Imagine placing a hat on your head, the fabric light, the brim barely brushing your forehead. By weight alone, it should feel like nothing, yet minutes later you sense a heaviness pressing down, as though the simple garment had thickened into something burdensome. You adjust it, test it in your hands, and find it feather light, unchanged. Still, when worn, it seems to carry gravity it does not possess. This is the hat weight illusion, the quiet trick of perception that makes the ordinary feel strangely weighted. Science offers one explanation in the body's sensitivity to new sensations. Even the lightest touch on the skin can become amplified when constant, as nerves continue sending signals that the brain interprets as pressure. Over time, attention itself magnifies the feeling. What begins as awareness of fabric becomes an impression of weight. Experiments show that the same principle applies to glasses, masks, even jewelry. Objects nearly weightless can feel heavy simply because the mind insists on noticing them. History holds echoes of this perception. In many cultures, headwear carried symbolic weight beyond its physical measure. Crowns and helmets, often far heavier in meaning than in metal, were described as burdens by those who wore them. Kings spoke of the crown as pressing on them even when set aside, while soldiers wrote of helmets that seemed crushing after hours, though their actual mass was modest. The body feels what the mind expects: responsibility, attention, and tradition all weaving into the illusion of heaviness. The paradox is gentle but persistent. The hat weighs almost nothing, yet under the lens of awareness, it becomes a burden. Imagine yourself wearing it, the fabric still, the air calm, and yet the sense of pressure undeniable. The illusion reminds you how even the lightest touch, carried long enough in mind and body, can feel like a weight you cannot ignore. Imagine yourself glancing at your phone between small errands, the kettle hissing, a door half open, the soft light of morning on the counter. A notification appears with a simple request. Can you confirm? Can you approve? Can you call back? In your mind, you compose the answer. Feel your thumb hover. Picture the message sent. Then the kettle sings. A parcel arrives. Someone says your name. Hours later, you relax, certain you replied. Only when a second reminder arrives do you see the thread still waiting, unsent, the cursor blinking like a quiet accusation. This is service call recall, the moment you remember an action you never took, a reply you never made, a task you finished only in thought. Psychologists describe this as a slip of prospective memory, the system that carries intentions forward in time. The brain rehearses an action, and if the rehearsal is vivid enough, it can be misfiled as done. Reality monitoring blurs. Did you press send, or did you only imagine the press? In modern life, the cues are everywhere. Draft windows that autosave, notifications that vanish, badges that clear when you open an app just to check. Each creates a feeling of completion without completion. In older ages, the pattern was similar, if slower. Clerks left letters sealed but unposted. Scribes marked margins as though a line was copied when it was only traced in the air. The rhythm of their lives, like yours, favored momentum over verification. You feel this most with routines. Locking the door, paying a bill, confirming an appointment. Repeated acts grow smooth, and smoothness invites confusion. The mind prefers to keep moving, and so it stitches intention to memory, calling the future past by mistake. To counter it, people leave gentle anchors, a pen turned sideways after signing, a sticky note that must be removed, an alarm named "actually send it." These small rituals slow the rush and separate thinking from doing. Service call. Recall is not failure, but a glimpse of how your days are woven, threads of action and threads of imagined action lying side by side. The comfort is this: the system that sometimes misfires is the same one that lets you plan, rehearse, and move gracefully through complexity. With a breath, you can return to the message, place your thumb on the glass, and make real what your mind had already begun. Imagine walking into a room when a sharp, distinct scent drifts through the air: cleaning fluid, fresh paint, gasoline, or a faint trace of chlorine. It pulls at you instantly, not toward the present moment, but backward into a memory you cannot fully name. You feel certain you have smelled it before, tied to a place once familiar, yet the location refuses to surface. It hovers at the edge of recall, leaving you caught between the clarity of sensation and the fog of forgetting. This is the chemical scent memory, when the nose remembers what the mind cannot. Neuroscience explains that smell is the sense most closely linked to memory, routed directly through the limbic system, where emotion and recollection intertwine. Unlike sights or sounds, scents can bypass conscious thought, awakening feelings and images long buried. Yet sometimes the association fails to return in full. The odor is vivid, but the scene it belongs to is lost. What remains is a haunting fragment, the trace of a classroom scrubbed with disinfectant, a workshop filled with oil, or a hospital hallway washed in antiseptic, without the clarity of time or place. History is rich with accounts of scent as memory's secret key. Ancient Egyptians burned resins not only as offerings, but as anchors of remembrance, believing certain fragrances tethered the soul to sacred spaces. In medieval Europe, physicians prescribed aromatic waters, noting how familiar scents seemed to restore patients' clarity. Even today, the faint odor of chemicals tied to factories, schools, or train stations can stir whole generations, recalling eras of industry or travel without summoning one precise memory. Imagine yourself standing still, breathing in that faint chemical trace. It does not belong to where you are, yet it feels more real than the present. The memory it carries remains hidden, like a locked room behind a half-opened door. And so you linger in that in-between space, knowing that something in your past has stirred, though it may never fully return. The scent fades, but its pull remains, a reminder that memory is not always stored in words or images, but in the invisible air we breathe. Imagine yourself staring at a painting on the wall, its colors vivid and steady. You blink, and for a fleeting instant the red seems darker, the blue a touch brighter, the green washed into another shade. You blink again, and the hues appear to settle back, though you cannot be sure if they are truly the same as before. This is the color drift mirage, the subtle perception that shades shift in the brief darkness between blinks, as though the world's palette is quietly unstable. For centuries, artists and observers alike have noted the mysterious fluidity of color. In medieval manuscripts, scribes sometimes wrote of pigments seeming to glow differently in morning and evening light, as though the inks carried a spirit of their own. Travelers in deserts described shifting sands under a burning sun, their tones deepening and fading with each glance, impossible to pin down. Imagine their unease, certain the world was alive in its own shifting spectrum. Modern science suggests a gentler cause. When you blink, even for a fraction of a second, your visual system briefly resets. Photoreceptors in the eyes adapt to light, and small shifts in focus or tear film moisture can alter how wavelengths are perceived. The brain then reconstructs color using context, expectation, and comparison. These tiny adjustments are usually invisible, but now and then they register consciously, giving you the uncanny impression that the world has repainted itself in your absence. Daily life carries quieter examples. A shirt in a shop may look one shade under fluorescent bulbs, then another when you step outside. A digital screen's colors may waver between glances, especially as brightness or angle changes. Even in familiar spaces, wallpaper, fabrics, or skies can seem to change tint with every new blink. Each time, the sensation leaves you questioning which shade is real, the one you first saw or the one that followed. The color drift mirage is more than a trick of sight. It is a reminder that color itself is never fixed. It exists only as perception, shaped by light, context, and the brain's ceaseless adjustments. To notice it is to glimpse the instability beneath the ordinary, the truth that what seems steady may in fact be endlessly shifting, flickering between blinks like a secret rhythm of the visible world. You turn a page, and before your eyes move down, the words seem to arrive in your mind. A line, a phrase, even the rhythm of a sentence, you feel as though you already knew it. This is book page prediction, the uncanny sense of reading ahead without ever glancing forward. Psychologists explain it as the brain's talent for pattern. Language follows rhythms, authors repeat structures, and your mind quietly learns them. When you encounter a familiar style, your brain fills in what feels inevitable: the final rhyme of a poem, the conclusion of an argument, the turn of dialogue. By the time your eyes confirm it, you feel you've read the line before. Daily life provides smaller echoes. In conversation, you sometimes know the exact word a friend will choose. While listening to a story, you predict the ending before it arrives. Songs are built on this very principle. Your brain sings the next note before it's played. Reading amplifies the effect because written language leaves just enough space for the mind to leap ahead. Across history, cultures tied this sensation to deeper insight. Ancient readers believed predictive reading was a gift of divine favor, the text revealing itself in advance. In some traditions, scriptures were thought to speak ahead to attentive readers, guiding them toward hidden truth. Even in secular contexts, writers have remarked on this eerie bond between reader and text, as though meaning reaches across the page before the eyes arrive. The book page prediction reminds us that reading is never passive. The mind does not simply absorb, it anticipates, guesses, rehearses. What feels like foresight is simply the brain leaping one step forward. But in that moment, the boundary between knowledge and intuition blurs, and the line belongs to you before you ever see it. Imagine walking along a road you know you've never traveled before. The buildings are unfamiliar, the trees are shaped in ways your memory does not hold, yet something in the curve of the path or the way the light falls convinces you that you've been here before. A faint pull of recognition settles in your chest, as though the road is not new but remembered. This is the path. Familiarity flash, when a place untouched by your past feels inexplicably known. Psychologists connect this to the phenomenon of déjà vu, when sensory input matches patterns stored deep in the brain. Perhaps the angle of the street echoes one from your childhood, or the rhythm of shadows resembles another time entirely. The brain searches for anchors, and when fragments overlap, it produces the conviction of memory. Research suggests that slight delays in processing between different neural pathways can also create this effect. The present experience feels like a repetition because your mind receives it twice. History is scattered with accounts of travelers struck by this sensation. Ancient pilgrims described arriving in foreign cities that seemed oddly familiar, interpreting the feeling as evidence of destiny or divine guidance. In folklore, it was sometimes explained as echoes of past lives, the soul recognizing roads once walked in another body. Even in modern times, the experience can be powerful enough to disorient, leaving a person convinced of invisible connections to places they could not have known. The paradox rests in how trustfully we believe our own sense of recognition. The road is new, yet the feeling is ancient. Imagine yourself pausing mid-step, torn between knowledge and intuition, the street both strange and deeply familiar. It is a reminder that memory is not only a record of where you have been, but also a mirror of patterns, endlessly searching, sometimes convincing you that the unknown has already been lived. Imagine yourself walking at night, a flashlight in your hand cutting a narrow path through the dark. The air is calm, no wind, no shifting mist, and yet the beam itself seems to flicker. It wavers as though something unseen has passed across it, a subtle ripple like disturbed water. You pause, steady your hand, but the light continues its faint trembling. This is the beam flicker illusion, when what should be a solid, constant stream of light appears unsteady, alive with motion that isn't really there. Psychologists suggest this arises from the delicate way your eyes and brain process contrast. Light against darkness is never perfectly stable. Tiny changes in the muscles of the eye, slight tremors of the hand, or even the way dust particles scatter the beam can create the impression of flicker. In some cases, the mind itself amplifies the effect, expecting motion where there is none. Historically, such wavering lights were read as omens. Sailors reported lantern beams dancing wildly before storms, even on still nights. In villages, a trembling torch was sometimes taken as a sign that spirits lingered nearby, bending the flame of light though no wind stirred. Even today, the illusion lingers in ordinary life. Hikers in forests may notice their beams pulsing faintly, as though the woods themselves were shifting. A child playing in a hallway may swear the flashlight trembles in steady air. The effect unsettles not because it is dramatic, but because it contradicts certainty. Light should be stable, yet your senses whisper otherwise. The beam flicker illusion reminds you how fragile perception is, how much depends on the quiet stitching together of expectation and sight. The beam is constant, but you do not see constancy. You see movement, ripples, shadows that do not belong. And in that subtle shimmer, you glimpse the truth that even the simplest tools of clarity are never entirely steady. What you trust to cut through the dark bends and wavers, revealing that certainty, like light itself, is always flickering. Imagine stepping into a quiet room, your eyes landing on a chair that feels as though it was just occupied. The cushion seems faintly pressed, the air around it carries a trace of warmth in your imagination, and you feel the weight of someone's presence lingering there. Yet the seat is empty, untouched, and no one has been near it for some time. This is the seat occupancy certainty, the strange conviction that a place was filled only moments ago, though all evidence says otherwise. Psychologists might call this a blend of expectation and sensory impression. The mind often projects presence into absence, especially in familiar settings where people usually gather. A chair in a living room, a bench at a train station, or a pew in a church carries with it the imprint of human use. When you glance quickly, your brain may supply the missing figure, filling in the gap with imagined memory. The effect is heightened by subtle cues, creases in fabric, a shadow falling just so, that hint at recent use even when none occurred. History and culture have wrapped such sensations in layers of meaning. In ancient households, it was common to keep one seat empty at meals for ancestral spirits, the belief being that unseen guests might still occupy the space. Folklore across Europe tells of phantom sitters, chairs that seemed to hold invisible presences, rocking or creaking without touch. In some traditions, the unshaken certainty that a seat was recently filled was taken as a sign of spiritual passage, a visitor slipping silently through the room. Imagine yourself pausing before such a chair, your mind caught between logic and feeling. No one sits there, yet the sense of someone having just risen is undeniable, almost comforting, almost uncanny. It is a reminder that presence is not only physical, but imagined, stitched from patterns and memory. The seat is empty, yes, but in the quiet conviction of your perception, it is also briefly, impossibly, full. Imagine yourself sprinkling a little salt onto food, expecting the familiar sharpness on your tongue. But as the grains dissolve, there is a fleeting surprise, a sweetness, faint and strange, before the flavor turns back to its expected edge. For a moment, the world of taste feels inverted, the ordinary boundary between sweet and salty blurred. This is the salt-sweetness effect, where the tongue deceives you with an impression that doesn't belong. Throughout history, taste has been a source of both survival and mystery. Ancient healers often believed shifts in flavor perception signaled changes in health or spirit. A sweetness where none belonged could be read as imbalance or sometimes as blessing. In medieval kitchens, cooks wrote of salt that seemed gentle on the tongue, as though the mineral itself carried moods. Imagine their confusion when something so constant could briefly transform, reminding them that even the most trusted ingredients were never entirely stable. Modern science explains this fleeting sweetness as a quirk of perception. The tongue carries thousands of receptors, each tuned to different flavors: salty, sweet, sour, bitter, umami. These receptors overlap in sensitivity, and under certain conditions, stimulation of salt receptors can momentarily trigger the pathways associated with sweetness. The sensation is brief, usually fading as the brain reasserts its categories, but long enough to create the impression that one taste has masqueraded as another. Daily life reveals similar moments. A sip of mineral water may seem faintly sweet before settling into neutrality. Certain cheeses or breads, rich in salt, can play tricks on the tongue, offering a flash of sugar where none exists. Even tears, with their briny edge, sometimes leave behind a ghost of sweetness. These impressions vanish quickly, but they linger in memory, unsettling in their subtle defiance of expectation. The salt-sweetness effect reminds you that perception is not fixed, but negotiated, a dialogue between body and brain. What you taste is not just the chemical truth on your tongue, but the interpretation layered upon it. In that fleeting sweetness where none belongs, you glimpse how fragile categories really are, and how easily the senses can rewrite the world. You set your bag down and step away. When you return, something about it feels altered. The bulge in one corner gone, the curve of the straps different, the weight distributed strangely. No one has touched it, yet its form seems to have shifted in your absence. This is the bag shape shift, the small but unsettling sense that objects change when left unseen. The explanation is often simple. Fabric relaxes, contents settle, air shifts through folds. But perception plays an equal role. Memory stores a snapshot of the bag as you last saw it, and when the real image fails to match that memory perfectly, the difference feels uncanny. The mind resists uncertainty, so the change is not just noticed, it is exaggerated into mystery. Daily life brings many versions of this. A coat left on a chair seems arranged differently when you return. Cushions on a sofa appear to sag more deeply. Even a pile of books can feel subtly rearranged, though no one has touched them. Objects bend to gravity and time, but it is our awareness that turns the ordinary into strangeness. Cultures have long given voice to this sensation. Folklore from Europe told of household spirits that subtly shifted belongings when humans looked away. In Japan, legends of Tsukumogami described objects coming alive after years of use, subtly altering their shape when unobserved. These stories captured what everyday perception often suggests, that things are not as fixed as we imagine. The bag shape shift reminds us that solidity is only partly real. Cloth, straps, and contents will always move, but the unease comes from the gap between memory and perception. Your bag has changed, but perhaps it is not the bag alone. It is the fragile trust in memory that has shifted too. Imagine noticing a single loose thread caught on your sleeve. You tug at it gently, expecting it to belong, but as you examine it, something feels off. Its texture, its color, the way it curls against the fabric, none of it matches the garment you are wearing. For a moment you are convinced it belongs elsewhere, to another shirt, another coat, some other piece of your life. This is the thread memory pull, the strange sense that a fragment in your hand carries history from beyond its true origin. The roots of this illusion lie in how the brain handles detail and association. Memory works not as a perfect archive, but as a network, always linking small cues to broader contexts. A thread of deep blue might summon the jacket you once wore in school, or a fraying fiber might recall a blanket from childhood. The mind leaps quickly, attaching meaning to the smallest object, until what is before you feels displaced, belonging to another time or place. Psychologists call this source misattribution, the tendency to remember the detail but lose track of where it truly came from. History and daily life are filled with echoes of this pull. Archaeologists unearthing cloth fragments often speculate on entire garments long gone, weaving stories from a single surviving fiber. In folklore, a loose thread was sometimes seen as a message, an unraveling link between worlds. Even today, fashion carries this quiet resonance. An heirloom scarf, a swatch of fabric saved in a drawer, each small piece recalling a garment or a person who no longer exists. The paradox is tender rather than unsettling. A thread is too small to carry memory, and yet it feels as though it does. Imagine yourself pausing, thread between your fingers, certain it came from somewhere else, even if you cannot say where. It is a reminder that memory clings not only to great objects and grand moments, but to the smallest fibers, weaving connections where none may truly exist. Imagine yourself standing at a sink, rolling a bar of soap between your hands. The water runs cold, a clear chill against your skin, and yet the soap itself feels warm, almost soft with heat. You check again. The water is unchanged, the room unheated, but the contrast remains. This is the soap temperature trick, when touch tells a story that logic denies, a small distortion born from the strange dialogue between your skin, your nerves, and your brain. Physiologists explain that materials conduct heat differently, and soap, with its smooth surface and particular density, does not carry away warmth as quickly as water does. Against cold water, the skin perceives the bar as relatively warmer, even though both rest at the same temperature. This trick of contrast plays out across many experiences. A metal doorknob feels icy compared to wood in the same room, or stone feels colder than cloth, though all share the same air. Your brain does not measure absolute temperature. It compares, stitching sensations together into a hierarchy of warm and cold. Across history, such shifts in perception often gave rise to small superstitions. In rural households, the warmth of soap in a cold wash was sometimes thought to mean it had absorbed sunlight from earlier in the day, carrying a memory of brightness into the night. In older traditions, objects that felt warm without cause were imagined as holding a spirit or essence, their unusual touch marking them as alive in some quiet way. In ordinary life, the soap temperature trick is a gentle reminder that your senses operate by contrast, not by certainty. The bar is not warm, the water not colder than it was a moment ago. Yet together, they create a fleeting illusion, convincing you of warmth where none exists. In this small misperception lies a larger truth. The world you feel is not the world as it is, but the one your body constructs, layered, comparative, and endlessly shifting with context. Imagine leaning toward a mirror, watching your own gaze return to you. You blink once, a simple rhythm you never notice until you catch it reflected. But then, for the briefest instant, you sense a delay. Your eyes in the glass seem to close just after yours, as if the reflection were lagging behind. The movement is subtle, almost imagined, yet unmistakably unsettling. The mirror no longer feels like a perfect copy, but something slightly out of sync. This is the eye reflection delay, a fleeting illusion that your reflection is not you, but something imitating you with imperfect timing. Psychologists might explain this as a trick of attention. When focusing intently on your own eyes, your brain processes the sequence of action and image with a tiny lag, leaving the impression that the reflection responded late. Our perception of time is not precise. It is stitched together from fragments, smoothed into coherence after the fact. In rare moments, the stitching frays and cause and effect slip out of alignment, leaving you with the feeling that your mirror self exists half a breath behind. History and folklore often cast mirrors as thresholds rather than mere surfaces. In medieval Europe, stories told of reflections with lives of their own, doppelgangers who lagged or moved differently, hinting at spirits trapped within glass. In Japanese tradition, mirrors were sacred tools believed to reveal hidden truths, sometimes showing more or less than reality. Even in modern accounts, people report staring at their reflections too long and noticing small discrepancies. A blink delayed, a smile that feels not quite simultaneous. Imagine yourself leaning closer, searching the reflection's gaze. Your own eyes obey your will instantly, yet the glass self seems to hesitate, to think before responding. Rationally, you know the physics is flawless. The light carries no delay your senses could detect, but the feeling lingers, soft and unnerving, as though the person staring back is not entirely you. In that small pause, that fraction of a second, you glimpse the fragile boundary between image and self, where even your own reflection can feel strangely other. Imagine yourself sitting before a candle, its flame steady in the still air. You watch it flicker and stretch, rising higher than the wick beneath it could possibly sustain. For a moment, the flame seems longer, taller, more substantial than it truly is, as though memory or imagination has added height to what the eye perceives. This is the flame height memory, a quiet distortion where light convinces you of excess, shaping perception into something slightly unreal. In earlier centuries, candlelight carried far greater weight. Families gathered by it for warmth, for work, for prayer. A taller flame might be read as a sign of blessing, of warning, of spirits present in the room. Monks in medieval monasteries sometimes recorded the seeming growth of a flame during vigils, convinced it mirrored the intensity of devotion. Sailors on long voyages watched the height of lantern flames, interpreting sudden elongation as omen of weather or fate. The flame was more than light. It was a symbol, alive with suggestion. Modern science shows how fragile the perception of height becomes with something as unstable as fire. A flame is not a solid object, but a glowing reaction, shimmering with heat waves that distort the air. The brightness at its center draws the eye upward, and the afterimage lingers, exaggerating length. Blink, and the flame seems taller. Look away and back again, and memory has stretched it further still. The mind prefers continuity, so it fills in the shifting outline with imagined stability, often taller than reality allows. Daily life offers subtle versions of this same trick. A match struck in darkness may seem brighter and longer than it truly burns. Street lamps glimpsed through mist stretch into luminous columns, far taller than their posts. Even the sun at the horizon appears larger than it is, pulled wider by atmosphere and memory combined. In each case, perception reshapes reality, leaving impressions that outlast the truth. The flame height memory reminds you that vision is not measurement, but interpretation. Light, shadow, and memory together craft illusions you take for fact. To watch a candle flame grow taller than itself is to be reminded of how easily the senses exaggerate, and how even the simplest glow can rise into something larger than life.